Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Familiar Summoning Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. There were always little touches between the two of them. Sometimes it would be for the comfort of the other, sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes they would latch onto the hands of each other from underneath the desks, not bothering to let go until they inevitably had to split up for class. Sometimes Bakugou would lean his body against Midoriya, chin hooked over his shoulder as he watched him scribble out some theory about a new hero or better yet, a new student. Sometimes Izuku would rest his head on his shoulder, his impossibly long lashes fluttering shut. Sometimes Bakugou would run a hand through the infamous green curls absent-mindedly as he cursed out someone over Midoriya's head. Sometimes Izuku would trip onto his doorstep, stumbling over his own feet, Katsuki's hand resting on his back, guiding him to the kitchen table. Those times he would pretend not to notice the blemishing bruises smattering the never-ending freckles. Those times the old hag would push a plate of leftovers onto the table and dress the cuts and scrapes while he tried to stop the tumbling of breaths, the shaking. Regardless of what happened behind closed doors, he had never really thought anything about their little touches until somebody brought it up. "Dude, are you guys, like, dating or something?" Izuku's right hand was clasped in his own, the other hand scribbling furiously in a notebook. The DMN nerd had taught himself to be ambidextrous. Their hands were hanging in between the aisle between their desks. They had nearly half an hour until their homeroom started and Bakugou had been talking, insulting, Mina, Fenji lesbian, when Shitty Hair just had to bring it up. Midoriya's head shot up at the suggestion, face tinted a pretty shade of red. Katsuki fumed as their hands were suddenly ripped apart. "No," delicate fingers signed. "Why would you think that?" The DMN idiot stood there, looking helpless and lost like he hadn't been expecting Midoriya to answer at all. Mina snorted. Scotch tape and FNG Pikachu were long gone. Siro was scrambling to finish his homework and Kaminari had probably left to go flirt with the headphone chick. Kirishima sheepishly rubbed his neck. "Sorry Midoriya, I'm still not the best at sign language but dash." Bakugou cut him off before he could finish. "What the F is it to you?" He seethed, suddenly more irritated than when they had first begun talking. The BS tier didn't even have the audacity to learn sign language when everyone knew that Midoriya was a mute. Except that was the thing. Everyone knew Izuku was mute and yet nobody ever made an effort to learn or even try to learn sign language. Growing up it was hard, kicking butt left and right with Izuku's frantic reassurances that, "It's okay." And, "They just don't understand," even with kids mimicking his hands, calling him broken, telling, reminding him that his mother didn't love him. FING middle school. Deku, Katsuki used to call him, a nickname, an endearing one at that. It all went to shit though when a couple of kids decided to call him useless. Dekunabu, they would taunt and jeer, "Useless Deku." To say that Bakugou got into fights in middle school was one hell of a FING understatement. Kids are ruthless and it set Bakugou off to no end when he saw someone regarding Izuku as something lesser, as incapable of being normal. He doesn't remember when he stood up or when his hands started cracking with sparks. Shitty Hair had his hands up in surrender, and Mina shifted nervously. All that he knew was that he was going to give that a-hole a piece of his mind, friend or not. He would kick anybody's but who even spoke to Izuku. A hand yanked him back down to his seat. When he turned to see who the hand belonged to he got a glare from Izuku. The same hand whacked his arm. "What dash?" He growled. "Calm down, translate for me." When Izuku ensured that he was watching, he started signing. His skin was milky, but there wasn't an inch of it that wasn't decorated with freckles. Sometimes, when he was sure that the other wasn't looking, he would take a moment to shamelessly rake his eyes down his body. He had come to terms with his crush on the guy back in middle school, and honestly, you couldn't blame him. Midoriya was pretty. He knew he wasn't the only one who thought that. He'd heard the ways the girls talked about him. Hell, he'd seen the way the guys had looked at him. Cute. They called him because by no means was Midoriya hot. No, he was too vanilla for that. His green curls glistened a pretty emerald. and if the sun hit him just right, his eyes shifted from jade to a turquoise. He had a petite stature, he had yet to grow past 5'6", skinny, but not frail. It was hard not get your eyes caught on him, with his skin being all marked up, there were even freckles on his hands, and the tunneling jade eyes and the soft laugh that was really just puffs of air and the boyish red sneakers and… He said if it… Bakugou deadpanned at an expectantly waiting Kirishima. He got a punch in the arm for that one, and it hurt. A-hole. He muttered. Do not be rude. Midoriya signed angrily before hurriedly turning to Shitty Hair and smiling while frantically trying to communicate that he was sorry before flipping to an empty page in his notebook. Angrily, Bakugou swiped the freckled hands into his own from the place where they were holding his notebook in place. Out of spite, he glared daggers into Kirishima. I'm sorry that he's so rude, don't take it personally. Don't worry about learning sign language, it's hard and it takes time. And no, we aren't dating. Kirishima rubbed the back of his neck, the dim and toothy smile was back. F-I-N-G shark mouth. Well, see you later, Midoriya. Class is about to start. Izuku nodded with a small smile and swiped his thumb over Bakugou's knuckles. Calm down. He was signing with one hand now, difficult, but not impossible. Nothing was impossible for him, he always figured something out. I am calm. He gritted out. Izuku snorted. No, you are not. Shut it, nerd. Midoriya squeezed his hand before turning to the front. Their homeroom teacher had brought himself back from the dead apparently and was standing up front, taking attendance. Midoriya was pretty. He was cute in a boyish way, unruly curls, freckles, scuffed red sneakers. Bakugou had one advantage over the rest of these fuckers, and he planned to go running with it. Izuku trusted him. They were over halfway through their first year, it would be arrogant to say that. The shorter of the two hadn't made any friends. Most of the Class 1A had picked up sign language within the first few months, and if they were still struggling with it they tended to carry around little notepads, it was just the way that they functioned. No matter how much he wanted to punch the lights out of half of the DM and extras in the class, he had to admit, they had an unbreakable dynamic, a bond. They've been through too much together already. But that didn't mean that Izuku trusted the rest of them, he had seen the hesitation during training activities. Sure, he respected them and treated them with kindness, as he does to everybody, but there were only a select few people in the class that he had really bonded with. Specifically Frogface and Tweety. In fact, Midoriya and the FING Pigeon Head had become pretty close within the first few months. Tokoyami had blended seamlessly into their dynamic, he even joined them on their walk home now. They were always chit-chatting about something that involved their quirks. To be fair, they both had a quirk involving familiars. Izuku had a summoning quirk, all he had to do was find a scrap of paper, he usually carried around a pad of sticky notes wherever he went, and wipe some of his blood on it. Whenever he summoned things from wherever the hell he did, he always seemed to summon a pair of a-hole foxes that would never shut the F up in their FNG ghost language or whatever. Today, they were chirping and clicking their tongues besides Izuku, weaving around his ankles and nudging at the boots of his hero costume. His hero costume was simple but got the job done. A sleeveless black turtleneck, it was made out of some sort of flexible material, not yarn, and fingerless gloves that ended halfway up his forearm. They were leather and embroidered in symbols that Bakugou had never understood, the gloves clung to him. The rest of his uniform wasn't anything special, a pair of black cargo pants tucked into combat boots. It suited him, he needed to be agile in order to keep up with the pair of foxes and the costume allowed it. He kind of looked like a FING vigilante or something. He was good at hand-to-hand combat too, since the foxes mostly only supplied a defensive shield, the three of them made a hell of a team. He had DMN near been knocked out cold during sparring with their quirks activated once. Control your familiars before I control them for you. Their FNG homeless man of a teacher suddenly directed his speech at Midoriya. To be fair, he would be set off too if a couple of animals kept interrupting him. Still, it wasn't entirely Izuku's fault. Sorry. He signed before swatting gently at the foxes' tails and shushing them. Their incoherent chattering didn't stop, but it did drop down to barely a murmur. Thank you. Midoriya glanced over and smiled sheepishly at Bakugou. Now as I was saying, their teacher pointed behind him, we will be conducting an exercise similar to the one at the very beginning of the year. In pairs of 2, each team will be split up into groups, villains and heroes. This time, you will be fighting in an arena made to look like a neighborhood. Your classmates will be playing the role of citizens. As heroes, your objective is to defend the citizens with destroying the least amount of property possible. If you fail to contain or disable your opponent by the end of the 15-minute mark, the villains win. Understood? Yes, sir. They were at lunch, Tokoyami scolding Dark Shadow, who was cowering behind Izuku. Stop, you will come forth and face your mistakes. They are your burden to bear. Fake but Edgar Allan Poe. Tsu gave a croak. What did he do? The fucker had dug through the classroom trash can while nobody was looking. Despite Tokoyami's protests, Dark Shadow was like a DMN dog, always getting into places where he wasn't supposed to be and always needing attention. Just sit down and eat your DMN food, he shot back. It was the nicest way he could possibly say, don't worry about it, eat your food before lunch ends. He'd hate to admit how much he'd started to care for the FING zoo attractions that Midoriya had befriended. The 4 of them, familiars and demons not included, tended to sit in the same clump of tables as Class 1A, but on the outer circle. The idiot squad sat with them too, Scotch Tape, the DMN lesbian, FING Pikachu, and Shitty Hair. But lunch had just started so the table was at peace for the time being. Again, he'd never acknowledged how much he cared for them. Katsuki knew he was a difficult person to be around. You have a strange way of showing that you care, Tsu hummed as she pulled out a juice box and offered on to Bakugou. Juice box, Karo? Can it, you DMN tadpole? He glowered, snatching the juice box out of her hands. In return, he tossed a piece of gum her way. Thank you, Bakugou. He grunted in response, moving to rest his chin on his hand. His eyes slid over to Midoriya, who was writing in his notebook, zoned out with a half-eaten granola bar long forgotten and tossed carelessly beside his work. Seriously? Zuku, he ripped the pencil out of the freckled grasp. When he got a glare in response, he just raised an eyebrow. Eat your fucking food. Really, he should be eating more than just a granola bar, after hero training especially. Tsu and Tokoyami were lost in a conversation already, about what exactly he didn't know, nor care. Midoriya threw his hands up in protest. I am almost done, give me back my pencil. No, he said gruffly, it can wait. Izuku shook his head and tried to defend himself again, but Bakugou didn't give him the chance. You either eat the DMN granola bar or I shove it down your motherfucking throat. He rolled his eyes but picked up the granola bar regardless. Katsuki took the chance to slide the notebook over to himself and lay his forearms on it. Eat, he said again when Midoriya did nothing more than nibble at the bar. Give me back my notebook. He countered, stubbornly. Bakugou gave a frustrated sigh. Stop being so fucking difficult, eat your shitty granola bar. When Izuku brought his hands up to protest again, Bakugou caught the hand closest to him. He laced their fingers together before dragging their conjoined hands to rest on his own knee. You can have it back when you're done, he snapped. Now eat your dash. You're so dumb. Mina cackled, doubling over with laughter at Kaminari, who had run into the emo girl who also just so happened to be Pikachu's crush. Unfortunately, he was also carrying his lunch. The idiots have arrived. Midoriya stifled a laugh in Katsuki's shoulder. He pretended to not notice the butterflies in his stomach. Fingers tugged at his uniform sleeve. Tell her. Shirt. Nurse. He was forced to sign with one hand again, which again, wasn't impossible but more difficult. He had to fingerspell almost everything that way, so he had abbreviated the message. It was vague but he understood it perfectly. You get a new uniform at the nurse's. Jairu startled at the suggestion like she didn't know he spoke anything but insults. Hurry up, it's pissing me off. She nodded with the faintest smile. Thanks. He didn't respond. Nice. Less cursing. Shut the F up. He grumbled, looking away and refusing to acknowledge the warmth on his cheeks. When he did happen to look back, he noticed that the granola bar was almost gone, small bites being taken from it little by little. If you don't fucking like it, then why'd you eat it? Could have gotten you something different. That's very kind of you, Bakugou, offering to purchase food for a fellow classmate. Tokoyami acknowledged, picking apart a piece of bread. Fucking Red Robin's mascot. Wow. New. I agree, Midoriya. I have never heard that before. It's quite funny, Tokoyami said, the slightest bit of amusement lacing his voice. Tsu gave a short hiccup of a laugh. Meanwhile, Izuku managed to force down the rest of his granola bar. Now, he demanded. Bakugou squinted at him, pretending not to understand. When he got a frustrated huff back, he snorted. All right, here's your DMN notebook. It was practically snatched from his fingertips. What are you working on now, Midoriya? It was Zero. Apparently, the dumbasses had gotten themselves together and finally decided to sit down. Theories. He had wriggled his other hand out of Bakugou's grasp and was now using both hands to sign. Geez, it seems like every time I see you you've got a notebook in your hand. Midoriya shrugged at that before turning back to his work. Mina and Tsu were comforting the FING phone charger beside Tokoyami, who was in a heavy discussion with Izuku, while Kirishima, Zero, and himself talked about the battles from the day. With lunch drawing to a near, Bakugou couldn't help but feel the familiar butterflies tumbling in his stomach whenever he looked over to see Midoriya grinning wildly at a suggestion that Tokoyami had made. Ding, dude, Kirishima said suddenly. Katsuki's eyes shifted back to Sharkmouth. He had a sheet-eating grin, Zero noticed too, and tried to connect the dots. He kept looking back and forth between the two. You've got it bad for him, he said, voice dropping down a few volumes. Bakugou gritted his teeth. When would he ever learn to stop being so effing nosy? Shut up. He glowered when Zero's eyes suddenly lit up in recognition of the situation. Even with Midoriya sitting right next to him, he was too deep in his weird but demonic conversation with Tokoyami right now to really acknowledge anything outside of his own little world. Kirishima grinned wickedly. My life. Most of the time, Bakugou was the only one talking on their home. School days were long for Izuku. He had to constantly be listening and paying close attention. He had to put about twice the amount of effort in any conversation compared to the average person. Today was no different. They always took their time on the walk home. Always talking the longer routes, stopping to window shop, reading the news headlines around the city. Never once had they been in a rush to get home. God knew Izuku was in no hurry. Sometimes, his family was able to convince Midoriya to stay with them for a few hours after school, long enough for dinner, sometimes a sleepover. Most of the time, he would politely decline with a smile and a shake of his head after maybe an hour and a half before excusing himself. No thank you, he would sign, Mom would want me home by now. Even though everyone knew that was a big FING lie. Izuku's mother, someone he used to call an Inko, was a FANG beach. She was a hag who drank her life away after her husband left her, leaving her own son to pick up after her messes. She'd been taking out her feelings on Midoriya for as long as he could remember. When he was younger it was worse, when he was smaller and less capable than his mother. Now though, he came to school with considerably fewer bruises. Never once had Izuku laid a finger on his mother, all he did was take and take and take and take. When it got to be too much for Midoriya, he would stumble into the Bakugou household, flinching at any sudden noises or movement, apologizing profusely for the unannounced intrusion. They would ask him, acting like everyone there didn't already know, "Who did this, Izuku? Who did this to you?" Never once did they get an answer. FNG failure of a mother. Set him off just thinking about the woman. Hey nerd, Mom's making stew tonight. He squeezed the freckled hand clasped in his own. Tokoyami was long gone, splitting from the duo a few blocks from the school. They lived in different parts of the city. Izuku started to shake his head but Katsuki shut him down. See how you feel after we make it to my house. I need help trying not to flunk out of FING Loudmouth's class anyways. Your notes are the only DMN things that make sense. That was a lie and they both knew it. Present mix class was by far the easiest. Regardless of the fact, Izuku let out a silent laugh. Everything he did was silent. He nodded, though not without reluctance. The rest of the walk home was silent, save for his own occasional acknowledgement of some hero merch by shops as they passed. Oi, we're home, he yelled out, kicking off his shoes and disregarding them by the door. Stop yelling. The old bat yelled back. Fing hypocrite. I'm not yelling. Yes, you are. Midoriya signed out with a cheeky smile, placing his shoes neatly beside Bakugou's dismantled ones. Fing hag. Sees me off. He muttered under his breath. Respect your mother, son. F you too. His dad sighed, openly choosing to ignore the comment. Hello, Izuku. He said, addressing him instead. Hello. Thank you for having me. Cut it out. You're always welcome here. Izuku apologized again. How was your day, boys? Fine, thank you. Katsuki grunted in agreement. Yours? He asked. Busy. His dad said, chuckling. Come, I'll fix you two a snack. His mom said, emerging from the office. Both of his parents worked at home, his mom working an office job and his dad working with if he knew numbers and sheet. Despite the seemingly high tension in the house, they had a pretty okay family dynamic. Yelling was normal in the house, they were a loud family, minus his dad. Katsuki swore his dad would be a bottom if he was gay. He was always FNG nice and sheet, keeping him and his mom at bay when the screaming got out of hand. Always knowing what to say to make him feel better when he was even angry or sad or some sheet. He doesn't know how his dad got stuck with such a hard butt. Hungry, Izuku? She asked. His mom was always forcing food down Midoriya's throat, and for a good reason too. Sometimes he looked half dead by the time the pair of them got home. No, I am okay. He signed quickly. Fing selfless BSTRD. Thank you for the offer. Bakugou rolled his eyes. I had to force a granola bar down his throat today at lunch. Izuku glared at him, betrayal laced with venom. His mother frowned. You need to eat to stay strong, or else you'll end up getting sick on us. His dad pointed out. He always said the right things to guilt-trip Izuku, in the most loving and caring way possible, of course. Midoriya sighed. Okay. He hesitantly signed, his mom's face brightened. Perfect. She disappeared into the kitchen. Any preferences? Katsuki glanced at Izuku who shook his head. Nah. Speak properly. I said fucking NODNIT. It was half an hour later when Izuku left, even after many attempts to try to get him to just stay, because it was safe. Katsuki. His mother. Come here for a minute. He was standing by the window, watching Izuku go and praying that he didn't come back to school with a blotchy cheek or band-aids on his fingers from cleaning up Inko's smashed beer bottles. When he didn't answer, his mother said again, Katsuki. What? Come here, please. With a huff, he dragged himself to the dinner table where his parents were waiting, not before looking back once or twice though, like Izuku had changed his mind and had magically appeared back on their doormat. What? He said again, more irritated than the last. You know that we love you, right? Okay? What the hell is this about anyway? He grunted, looking away. We've seen how you and Izuku act around each other, son. His dad moved his hand to clasp around his wives. We would welcome anybody into the family if they make you happy, understand? What the hell was he talking about? Welcoming anybody into the family? It wasn't like he was FNG dating Enio. You understand? His dad said again, adjusting his glasses. They were giving him permission to date boys. Specifically Izuku. What the F dash? Embarrassed, Katsuki stood up suddenly. Whatever. I'm not effing dating anybody. He said, red in the face before storming up to his room. First Kirishima and now his parents. Izuku didn't know kind touches at home. It was always rough shoving, slurred yelling and blunt blows. It didn't hurt anymore, not really anyways. It was worse when he was younger. He remembers coming to school all black and blue once with the pathetic excuse that he had fallen down the stairs. Sometimes his mom got a good hit in, though it was usually just hand marks on his arms or cheek that faded within a day, if not overnight. Last night was new. He had come home early, as per usual, opting to split off from Katsuki when his house came in sight instead of visiting for an hour or so at the Bakugou household. He was so grateful, so grateful, for the Bakugous, but he couldn't afford to waste any time. He had too much work to do. Preferably, he arrived at home within the first hour or so that school ended, assuming he didn't get caught up with Katsuki's family, so that he could finish his work before his mother got home. Sometimes she brought Makoto with her, sometimes she didn't. Nights where she brought her friend? Guilty pleasure? He was able to rest easy. He didn't like the idea of his mother drinking without supervision, so on nights where she didn't come home with her coworker, he would sit in the kitchen pretending to clean, checking up on her every once in a while to make sure she hadn't passed out. Those were the nights where he took the most damage, but she was still his mother, and he refused to let her fall deeper into what was already assumed to be rock bottom. Sometimes he would have to run a bath for her and help her to bed. Other times he would leave her on the shitty couch out of spite. Selfish, he was so selfish. Days when Makoto was over were better. At first, he had been wary, scared that he might take advantage of her when she was drunk. Eventually, he discovered that the man was just as worried about his mother as her son was. Izuku took advantage of that and only left his room once or twice to make sure nobody passed out or anything of the sorts. Sure, he would still drink, but he always made sure to control his liquor intake. Makoto never pushed the boundaries with him either, never going as far as calling him by his first name, but he always made sure to draw his mother away from him when she started getting upset and violent. "He's just a kid," Makoto would say, hugging his mother from behind, "leave him be." Sometimes he gave Izuku money for lunch if he stayed the night. He liked him. Last night Makoto wasn't over, last night was a bad night. Last night was new. Nobody was there to stop his mother from drinking past her limits. Nobody was there to stop his mother from making rash decisions. Well, Izuku was there, but she never listened to him. Last night, like always, he had sat at the kitchen table pretending to do homework. From there he had a perfect view of the back of the couch, meaning all he had to do was stand up to get a peek at how his mother was doing. He worried about her. But last night wasn't like always, last night was new. His mother had gotten angry at him, slurring insults and curses. For what though, he didn't exactly know. He had tried to calm her down by offering a glass of water or fixing some food or something, he didn't remember. She had been angry at him, raging. Even when he started signing, she would scream at him to speak with his voice or not at all. And then something unexpected happened. He had expected her to take a weak swing with her fist, maybe a kick at his shin, the usual. Instead, she lurched forward and swung the bottle at the side of his head. He doesn't remember much after that. He remembered the pain, of course, the shards of glass digging into his palms when he dropped to his hands and knees. He remembered holding onto his head where pain exploded, something warm and wet seeping through his fingers. Nothing else, though. He didn't know when he stumbled into his room, and he didn't know how he'd made it to his bed. So now he was in the bathroom, having woken up with sticky clumps of blood dried on his forehead and blood-stained sheets. He had woken up earlier than he usually did by about an hour or so, and he took the extra time he had with gratitude. He had already showered, taken extra care with washing his body by making sure all of the bits of glass were off his skin and out of his hair. Now, he was staring at the nasty cut on his forehead. The edges around it were swollen and bruised to all hell, and he had a killer headache. He hoped it wasn't infected. Luckily, he had some loose gauze and funny-looking band-aids with cartoon characters on them in a bin under his bed. The bin was usually reserved for when he or his mother cut themselves on a broken bottle. He usually cut himself picking up the stray pieces. She usually cut herself from uncoordinated limbs. Unfortunately, Izuku was out of rubbing alcohol. He had originally been terrified of the wound getting infected and contemplated asking his childhood friend to bring some disinfectant before he had managed to find some hand sanitizer in one of the drawers under the sink. "It'll have to do." After a rather painful procedure of making sure all of the cuts and gashes were disinfected, he moved on to dressing the wounds. The task was much harder considering he could barely string together a coherent thought through the little percussionist banging on the timpani inside of his head. It had taken a while, but eventually he managed the task. Colorful band-aids, some with little cartoon characters, littered his hands and arms while the painful gash on his temple was wrapped poorly with shaky fingertips. Izuku bit his lip and squeezed his eyes shut against the agonizing throb of his head, hands braced on the counter. A gentle chime cut through the silent fog in the bathroom. "Cat, 7:32 a.m. Izuku smiled to himself. Izuku never got kind touches at home, or rather he never received affection. Somehow Katsue recognized it and accepted it. He was always offering some sort of physical contact for Izuku to leech off of. He never said anything when Midoriya leaned into his touch or sat as close as humanly possible to him whenever there were too many people in the area for Izuku's liking. For that, he was grateful. Cat, 7:35 a.m. You better be awake. The nickname Cat came from when they were still small, an abbreviation of the name Katsuki. It was actually Katsuki's sign name, the word cat, in sign language. Usually though, when they were texting or if he had to fingerspell his name for whatever reason, he spelled cat with a K. Me, 7:36 a.m. I am, sorry. Cat, 7:37 a.m. whatever am by the shitty corner store already though so be ready. Me, 7:37 a.m. okay thanks. Izuku put his phone down and ran a hand raggedly through his hair, which was dry for the most part. After he brushed his teeth, he pulled on his uniform before scrambling to gather all of his loose papers and textbooks just so he could stuff them in his bag without a second thought. Carefully, he crept through the house. He didn't want to wake his mother up, and even if she was already up, he didn't want to deal with her. You're an awful son, such an awful son. He thanked every saint he could think of when he found her passed out on the couch. Cat, 7:42 a.m. here. As quickly and quietly as he could, he filled a glass of water and left it next to the coffee table beside the couch along with a bottle of aspirin. He tugged on his sneakers, head spinning when he had to bend down momentarily, before swinging open the door. Finally, though. Izuku clicked the door shut behind him as he trudged down the steps to meet Katsuki, who was staring at him with a look of disbelief and another emotion he couldn't quite place. Izuku swallowed thickly, a sudden sensation of prickling behind his eyes. He stared everywhere but his friend. What the hell happened? Katsuki demanded. Izuku winced at the volume. He was loud. Swallowing thickly, he signed, "Nothing. We are going to be late. Let's go." He saw Katsuki open his mouth like he wanted to say something but decided against it. The walk to school was quiet. The only sounds were the birds' occasional chatter and soft gusts of wind rustling trees. He was out of it, he was aware of that much, and he assumed Katsuki was too. Right now, though, he was just focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. His headache was pounding and he could just barely focus enough through the weird funk he was in to notice a warmth on his hand. He startled at the touch, but when he looked down and processed it was actually just Katsuki's hand, he tangled their fingers together and squeezed. The other hand squeezed back. Kat's hands were calloused and rough. He liked to trace his fingers along the bumps and ridges sometimes. They were familiar, they were safe. He liked to hold Katsuki's hands, they were nice. He was nice and strong and brave and handsome and kind. They had arrived to class with 25 minutes to spare. He vaguely remembers being tugged down into his seat by Kat and few concerned murmurs rippling throughout the room. He's not entirely sure how he got to the class or how he got in the school for that matter, but he was here and that was already enough as it is. Izuku's head was pillowed in his arms, and Katsuki was leaning on the edge of his desk playing with the hair at the nape of his neck, sometimes moving to scratch behind his ear. If he was trying to distract him, it was working really well. Izuku was melting at his touch, unconsciously leaning into it. Tokoyami and Tsu were standing by idly too, for what reason he didn't know. Maybe they were worried. Yo, Bakugou. Good grief. What up? Kaminari. He was so loud. There was a sledgehammer against his head. Hey Tsu, Tokoyami. Hello, Siro. Tsu croaked. Tokoyami didn't respond, but he could assume that he put his hand up in greeting. Sup Midoriya. Kirishima. He didn't want to lift his head up, he really didn't want to talk right in. Izuku slowly forced himself to sit up, eyes adjusting to the light and head spinning. He was about to sign a half-butted greeting before Kirishima's eyes opened wide like saucers. Holy dude, you're bleeding. Was he? What dash? A rough hand grabbed at his chin and forced his head to the left. Katsuki's face was in front of him, Tsu and Tokoyami looking over his shoulder. That doesn't look good, Karo, Tsu said, frowning. Tokoyami hummed, You are bleeding through your bandage, Midoriya. He uncrossed his arms and moved to peel back a corner of the gauze. Izuku saw when Tokoyami flinched back at the sight. Perhaps we should take him to Recovery Girl? No fucking shit, bird brain. Next thing he knew, he was sitting on one of the cots inside of the nurse's office. Recovery Girl was in front of him, with a frown tugging at her lips as she examined his forehead. The exploding pain and incoherence were gone. It seemed she had already performed whatever needed to be done. All right there, Midoriya? She asked, leaning back after giving a subtle pat on his cheek. He nodded sluggishly. His head was left with a dull throb, which was close to nothing compared to the migraine he had earlier. For that at least he was grateful. Now he was just tired. That was a nasty gash you had there, boy. She glanced down at his arms. Somebody had taken off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. The colorful bandages he had applied in the morning were still there. It's better to just let those little things heal on their own. I don't want to take too much out of you. The head injury was already taxing enough on your body. Izuku nodded, moving to roll down his sleeves before movement at the far end of the room caught his eye. It was Tokoyami and Katsuki. Tokoyami's arms were crossed, but his pointer finger kept tapping at his forearm, a tick Izuku only saw when the avian was worried or in deep thought. Bakugou was staring him down, worry being overshadowed by what could only be described as burning rage that just screamed, "I'm going to beat the stupid out of you." Recovery Girl followed his line of sight. Ah, those two? That boy's companion, Dark Shadow was it? Brought you in here looking half dead. You should be grateful you've got friends like those two. A warmth spread through Izuku's chest, the corner of his mouth quirking up. Yes, he was forever grateful for them. Now, do you want to tell me why you had to be carried to my office with a concussion, an infected head wound, and a dozen minor injuries? Immediately his walls went back up. It's nothing, I just fell. He signed dismissively, tugging on his jacket. He really didn't want to get into it, never did. Not with Katsuki, not with Tokoyami and Tsu, nobody. Real friends don't lie, you're such a liar. Bullshit. Katsuki burst out angrily, hands crackling with sparks. Tokoyami grabbed at his arm with a firm grip and Midoriya pointedly looked away. Can I go now? Recovery Girl hesitated. I want to go, please. She sighed and nodded, but before handing him a pamphlet. Remember that you can trust everyone here at the school, okay? No, I can't. Reluctantly he took the packet and nodded. The pamphlet was in the garbage before noon. At first, Katsuki had thought that he was high off his sheet, the way he was stumbling, acting like his own two legs didn't belong to him. Some sort of FNG coping mechanism for everything happening at home. Izuku had stumbled out of his house looking like he had been killed FANG 12 times over. His eyes foggy and blank, dark bags digging mercilessly into his skin that was pale and gray. He looked like he could barely FNG stand, gauze wrapped around his head and FNG colorful but band-aids covering up his freckles. The demon nerd had the nerve to tell him that it was nothing. Bullshit. He should have taken him to Recovery Girl as soon as he stepped foot in the school. Instead, he decided to see how it played out, but only because he knew Izuku FANG hated missing class. FING bullshit. He remembered everyone's faces when Izuku stumbled into the classroom, looking like he was FANG reincarnated from a pile of sheet. Tokoyami and Tsu had immediately stopped their conversation and made a beeline for the two as he led the FING idiot to his desk. It was cute how Izuku leaned into his touch like a cat when he was playing with his hair. It was cute until the effing nerd pushed himself upright with shaky hands looking worse than when they'd arrived. Until Tokoyami peeled back the gauze and they were greeted with ugly black blemishing and a gash brimming with blood and pus. Until they had barely made it 2 steps out of the classroom when Izuku's brain decided to check the F out and he collapsed. Until Tokoyami and Dark Shadow were holding up his best friend, who he was really FING gay for, who was looking no better than a ragdoll. How could you let it get this bad? He had to fight their homeless but teacher to go with Tokoyami to the nurse. His excuse was that Izuku trusted him. Frogface wasn't so lucky. The trip to Recovery Girl had left Izuku exhausted. Katsuki had watched as his shoulders slumped during class, how his fingers moved slower than usual. During passing PRDS he did what he could, letting Izuku lean against him. Tsu carried his bag for him and Tokoyami kept a firm hand on Midoriya's shoulder that wasn't leaning against Bakugou. Now though, Izuku's head was pillowed back in his arms and Katsuki's hand was tangled back in his hair. They were at lunch, and Midoriya had pressed up against the side of him. Nothing usual. Sometimes he did it just because he wanted physical contact and other times it was because of what Bakugou presumed to be the loudmouths at the table being, well, too loud. As much as he wanted Izuku to eat, he was finally getting what his body had been craving all day: sleep. So Katsuki let him, Izuku's body leaning just the slightest against his own as he scratched and mussed through those gorgeous green curls. He quietly ate his food. The two FING zoo attractions followed suit. Tokoyami was sitting across from Izuku, occasionally glancing up like a worrying mother. Tsu was on Izuku's other side, copying her own notes from class into his notebook. The idiots hadn't come to sit with them today, probably because he threatened to blow their FING faces off into space if they were being too loud. Bakugou, Tsu croaked quietly, staying mindful of Izuku resting. He grunted in response. Midoriya's mother hits him. She said it like it was a straight if in fact like there was no way it wasn't true. Maybe because it is true. Out of the corner of the eye, he saw Tokoyami clench his fists, shaking with effort. The demon lizard was always blunt. There was no way around the truth with her. Once she connected the dots, it wasn't like she eased you into the situation. She just completely shattered your entire worldview and then skipped away like it never happened. Yeah, he said gruffly, working gently through the tangles in Izuku's hair. No point in avoiding the topic with her anyways. Never been like this, though. His eyes darted down to Izuku, who shifted in his sleep momentarily when he tugged a little too hard. It was easy enough to put two and two together, really. From the way Izuku seemed to always flinch at high fives or friendly gestures, to the bruises and nicks in his skin. Izuku was getting better at the aspect of touch though. He was more than comfortable with Bakugou, but he had started to lean into other people's touches too a few months ago. Like Tsu's little head pats or Tokoyami's hand bracing against his back. Tsu bobbed her head passively. Forgive me if I misunderstand, but we are all friends, yes? Tokoyami asked, looking away as he spoke. Tsu confirmed with a nod and Bakugou stared blankly at him. What are you dumb? Tokoyami grimaced at that. Katsuki softened his tone. Course we're fucking friends. This time it was his turn to look away. Best friends? He muttered the word like it explained everything. The four of them had a different dynamic than the rest of the class. They trusted each other with their lives, and it showed in the wide range of scenarios they had to pull through in the past. They'd been there for each other through absolutely everything, with Tsu's bullies, who had gotten their buttes beat black and blue, Tokoyami's insomnia and crippling phobia of the dark, his own kidnapping, and then Izuku's abuse. He hadn't realized how close they had gotten until now. Tsu smiled. Best friends? She agreed. Tokoyami echoed the statement. Best friends? We're home. Bakugou yelled out. Katsuki, if I have to tell you one more F-time dash. His mother emerged from the study, suddenly stopping in her tracks when she saw who was at the front door. Her mood flipped like a switch. Ooh, you brought friends. She smiled sweetly as she hurried over to them. He had invited the two freak shows to his house after school. It was their last school day of the week anyways. The Fenji psychotic beach dash, he muttered under his breath. Respect your mother, son. Yeah, I get it. He grumbled, letting go of Izuku's hand to kick off his shoes. The rest followed suit, albeit alighting their shoes more neatly than his. Hello Izuku, his dad said, voice dipping in the middle when he got a good glance at the state he was in. Doing all right? Fine, thank you. Izuku signed with shaky hands. Exhaustion was looming over him despite his nap during lunch, his skin still an ashy color, and his eyes dull. His dad looked unconvinced but nodded regardless. His mother had taken Izuku by the shoulders though, to get a better look at him before guiding him to the kitchen table. Who might you two be? His dad asked kindly, a warm smile on his face. The guy was the nicest FING person on the planet, a motherfucking ray of sunshine. Again, Katsuki asked himself, how in the hell did he get stuck with us? Tokoyami is the emo one and Tsu is the fucking frog, he said before the two of them could answer. Hello, Tsu said. Tokoyami did nothing but hold up his hand in greeting. Nice to meet you. His dad didn't miss a beat. Please, come in. We have some leftovers that can hold you over until dinner. Katsuki took their bags and left momentarily to dump them gracefully onto his bedroom floor. When he came back, everyone was already situated at the kitchen table. Katsuki tossed around Midoriya's curls as he took a seat next to him, who looked up with confused, bleary eyes. You look high off your sheet. He snorted. Tokoyami grunted in agreement and Tsu leaned over to get a good look at Izuku. Katsuki. His dad said, exasperated, please, not everyone here is as acquainted with you as Izuku. Impressions are important, son. Forgive me, but that is the most humane and untainted sentence I've heard his mouth evoke today, Tokoyami said. F-I-N-G smart butt. Fuckin' featherface. He grumbled. The F, does evoke even mean? Tsu ignored his comment. We're all friends. She said, best friends? Izuku slanted sideways suddenly, Bakugou catching him and pushing him back upright. His mother laughed fondly. Please make yourselves comfortable, I'll call you down when dinner's ready. Her mood shifted suddenly. Katsuki. What? Make sure they're comfortable. They ended up on his bed, Tokoyami leaning against the windowsill like the FNG bird that he is and Tsu sitting cross-legged on the carpet. Izuku's head was in his lap. He was asleep and lolled his head when Katsuki scratched the spot just behind his ear. He was playing with his hair again, tangling his fingers through the curls and refusing to acknowledge the blush that was creeping up his face. Midoriya acts like a cat. Tsu croaked. It's very cute. Bakugou couldn't help but agree, it was very cute. When his mother called him down for dinner and he removed his hand from the mop of hair, a freckled hand grabbed at his and pushed it back into the nest of emerald green curls. Tsu laughed with her weird hiccupy laugh and Tokoyami offered to bring food up for the two of them. The pair of them ended up heading home just before dark, insisting that they'd be fine since the transit wasn't down yet. Bakugou left Izuku curled up on his sheets when he was sure he was asleep to go talk to his parents. He told them about the incident, about the concussion, the infection, told them he was afraid for him. Izuku stayed the night. Recently I had decided it would be a good idea, and a safety precaution, to shove all its shitty students into some FING rich boy hotel the school called dorms. It was probably a combination of his whole year getting FNG destroyed back in the shitty forest and the villains doing a half-butted job at kidnapping him roughly 3 months ago. The kidnapping had been something that happened. He had felt like shit for weeks afterward, not because he was subjected to torture or some shit, but because he felt guilty. He had nightmares, sometimes about what if it hadn't been me? All because he had been too prideful to listen. Tokoyami had almost gotten yanked into the mess too. His friends hadn't done anything dumb like try to locate him or try to fight the BSDRDS who took him. No, they were smarter than that. Instead, they had quietly gathered clues and bits of information from the sidelines. Midoriya's notes, thorough as ever, caught every last detail on the fuckers while Tsu and Tokoyami had pulled together aspects and situations, theories. Of course, the school had forced the trio to hand it in when they found out, but coincidentally, a rescue team was formed the same day and Katsuki was rescued like some sort of FING damsel in distress. In the aftermath, Izuku had slept over at his house more often, not mentioning the way that he had flinched when the lights were shut off. Not mentioning the way that Katsuki had curled into Izuku's chest and clenched his shirt like a lifeline. Not mentioning the way that he had cried silently into his shoulder when a nightmare had left him startled and in a cold sweat. Tsu and Tokoyami had helped too, writing out notes when he clearly did not give a flying F-, never coming up in his blind spot, always letting him sit with his back to the wall, and not mentioning it like they knew how ashamed he was. Bakugou had heard about the rumors flying back and forth that dorms were being built on the grounds as soon as he stepped foot back into that FNG school a few months back. They had only just finished building them a couple of days after the little fucking get-together with the freak shows and his future boyfriend, Izuku, and then they were forced to move the F in. That was 2 weeks ago, and if Katsuki was being honest, the dorms were good. He and his best friends had sleepovers all the time, playing cards, analyzing heroes, doing homework, eating, talking, laughing, smiling, being FING kids. Izuku didn't have to be home with the FING rat anymore, Tokoyami and Bakugou both didn't have to spend the dark nights alone anymore, and Tsu didn't have to be scared of the motherfucking creeps on her way home anymore. Yet, despite Izuku having the freedom to not be afraid to, exist the second he stepped foot off school grounds, he still went back to that hellhole he called home once a week to make sure the beach was still alive and kicking. A waste of FNG time if you asked him. That's why when Katsuki saw him the next morning after his little visit, he knew something was off. He had immediately jumped to the worst possible scenario. Could you FNG blame him? That Inko, she didn't deserve the title of mother, had hit him again. But as soon as he raced to close the distance between the two of them, Bakugou realized that it was something different. Yes, Katsuki had been relieved that his friend, crush, hadn't been hurt, physically at least, but he could practically feel the FING anxiety coming off of the nerd. Izuku had FING flinched. He had flinched backward into that fancy but door with the stupid FING smiley face stickers from the sticker pack that Izuku and Tokoyami had been obsessed with, and, God, it had hurt. It was then that Katsuki concluded that it was going to be a bad day. Izuku had flinched backward from Bakugou before. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence. Sometimes it just got to be too much for Midoriya, whether it be regarding the bustling city's input or Inko. Fucking sensory overload, or some bullshit is what people had called it. Not like he had gone to Recovery Girl asking around or anything. Days like these Izuku would constantly be on edge, paranoid and precautious of ifing anybody and anything that came even remotely near him. Any sudden movements would immediately cause some kind of trigger in his shitty brain that threw all rational FING thought out of the DMN window. Every movement always had to be calculated and measured with him. Anybody who had spent more than 2 FING minutes with him could do the math and figure out Izuku was skittish as hell on any normal day. Katsuki remembered the first day of Yuda well, how Izuku had DMN near clung to him all day. Not that he minded, but it hurt to see his best friend picking away at his hands in a desperate attempt to stay in tune with reality. As if the staying up until but o'clock researching dumb sheet and forgetting to nourish his FANG body wasn't enough. Another shitty habit of his was picking away at his cuticles until they were bloody. It wasn't uncommon for Izuku to be on edge like he was today, but it certainly wasn't normal. What the happened? The words were on the tip of his tongue before he ultimately decided to click his mouth. Izuku wasn't looking at him. Hey. Katsuki said softly, offering his hand, palm up, hoping that he'd take it. The silence was thick between the two of them, dense and swampy. Of course, it was always silent between the two of them, but it was usually comfortable. When Izuku did nothing but stare at his hand, blank and unseeing, he cautiously raised his hand up. Dull emerald eyes followed his hand the entire way until his rough, calloused hand carefully rested against Izuku's cheek. Stop dash, Katsuki swallowed. Stop fucking looking at me like I'm gonna hurt you or some bullshit. His voice dropped down to an uncharacteristic whisper. He caught Izuku's eyes and stared into the endless orbs of shifting emeralds. I'd never. He counted it as a tiny victory when Izuku gave a tiny nod against his palm as he leaned into the touch, eyes fluttering closed for a moment before they opened back up. Izuku exhaled softly. The morning light from a nearby window was hitting him just right, catching his hair in a lush mix of greens and dripping honey light. He looked guilty, pretty eyes downcast and eyebrows knitted together. Sorry. The F, you sorry for? Katsuki grunted. A freckled hand came up to clutch the one resting on his cheek, the other hand coming up to sign. 0. F. B time, Bakugou was always able to pull through his cryptic one-hand fingerspelling. Assuming the F stood for Tsu's sign name, frog, and B stood for Tokoyami's sign name, bird, this one was no different. Nothing. Let's go, Tsu and Tokoyami are waiting. If they hadn't passed out in one or the other's rooms the night before, the four of them always met up at breakfast. Don't tell me it's nothing, nerd, Katsuki said, leading Izuku toward the elevator with their tangled fingers hanging in between them. Sock to have shitty days. When Izuku squeezed his hand, Katsuki squeezed back. Breakfast was peaceful as per normal. The four of them always ate outside, away from prying eyes and the dumbass screaming at the butt crack of dawn. They were eating in a circle today, chopsticks gently clicking against the bowls of rice. All of them were still in their pajamas, They probably looked fing homeless or something. They usually got up early and gathered together to eat around 6:30. From there they met up in Izuku's room after everyone had finished getting dressed. Tokoyami and Tsu seemed to understand the look he gave them when he had come out of the elevator with two freckled hands gripping one of his with knuckle-white strain. Izuku set his half-empty bowl down in front of him. He'd probably forced himself to even make it that far so Bakugou didn't push. "Have you completed your meal, Izuku?" The four of them agreed to start using their first names a couple of weeks ago. Tokoyami had actually received a couple of nicknames from Tsu and Izuku as well. Fumi, Tsu would sometimes say, Yami. The nicknames had made Fumikage, without fail, duck his head in flustered embarrassment. He couldn't say shit though because the FING circus attractions had started to use the nickname that Izuku had made for him too, Cat. Sure, it was considered NTMT and uncommon for people, regardless of their age, to give permission to state their first names, but after Katsuki had given some thought to it he realized that they were more than fucking comfortable with each other. He had trusted these people with his life, they had gotten him out of the dusty but villain lair because they cared. He realized that he would go to the end of the earth for the FING weirdos, because they had for him. So, he told them to call him Katsuki, and in response, Izuku had told them to call him, well, Izuku. Tokoyami had followed suit, talking like his usual gothic FING self and telling them to refer to him as Fumikage. "May I take your bowl indoors, Izuku?" Fumikage tried again when Izuku didn't answer. Wordlessly, a freckled hand passed up a half-empty bowl of rice. Fumikage stacked the two bowls on top of one another and held them in one hand, the other extending out to Izuku. "Perhaps you'd like to join me in obtaining a beverage?" It was an offer of private comfort, something to get Izuku out of his shitty headspace. "Okay." Izuku signed reluctantly, taking the hand and letting it pull him up. As soon as Izuku was standing, Fumikage's free hand went to rest in between his shoulder blades, guiding him. Fumikage wasn't big on physical contact, though the four of them usually interacted in simple gestures like high fives and sheet. Nothing too fucking extravagant. They weren't like FANG Pinky and her herd of idiots who were always somehow cuddling or some sappy sheet. Tsu usually liked to lean against them, while Mr. Hot Topic referred to giving dad touches, hands clapping on shoulders and all that. The guy was starting to remind Katsuki of his own dad at this point. "Did something happen at his house, Karo?" Tsu croaked as soon as the two of them had disappeared behind double doors. Katsuki shrugged in response, giving a sideways glance at the door when there was a shout from inside the building. Everyone else must be awake by now. They barely had an hour left before school started at 8. "Wish I could tell ya, Frogface." Tsu frowned at that. "What if we could get him to stay in the dorms? He doesn't look good." "Good luck trying to convince him." He sat, setting his bowl on the concrete with a clatter. He took a sip of the water that he had brought outside with him when they had first served breakfast to themselves. She brought a finger to her mouth, her gaze was thoughtful. "What if you could convince him since you two are in love with each other?" Katsuki choked and Tsu looked genuinely confused, like she didn't understand how suggesting no, stating that he was an FNG in love with his best friend made him choke. He could feel that his face was on FNG fire but he didn't get a chance to strangle the DMN amphibian because the double doors swung back opened and Izuku came out with a cup of hot chocolate cradled in his hands. There was a mug in one of Fumikage's hands. It was coffee, probably straight black because he was emo as F, and didn't have taste buds apparently. Fumikage was engaging in a one-sided conversation about Quirk theories and the corners of Izuku's mouth were tugged into a soft smile. So, everything about Izuku was soft. His gentle smiles and the way they could melt the tension in a room in a second. His delicate hands and the freckles smeared into every crevice of his skin. His emerald hair and the way the light shaped and bounced off each and every individual loose curl. His lips and the way that they pressed against the edge of the cup. Katsuki looked away, face hot. Katsuki wishes he could lie and say that Izuku wasn't a stubborn and a-hole, but he was. The school day was rough to say the very least. More than once Katsuki had caught freckled fingers digging into dainty hands, or clumps of curls. More than once had Katsuki pulled Izuku aside during the passing PRD, convincing Tsu and Fumikage to go without them, just so he could push the pretty curls away from their place dangling in front of wild eyes and run his thumb under a freckled cheekbone in a desperate attempt to calm. Izuku was on edge, more so than usual. It was hard to see him rocking in his chair during class, fingers digging into pretty marked skin in a futile attempt to comfort himself. So Katsuki did what he could, glared at anyone who got too close, letting dainty hands grip his own in a bone-crushing grip with no complaints. Fumikage would constantly drone out theories and new developments in their latest research, whatever it was, FNG nerdy but demon summoners, and Tsu took notes for Izuku. Everything was going as smoothly as it could be, with Izuku looking 10 seconds from a mental breakdown, until they got to FING All Might's class. They had to take a long but test that was supposed to be a surprise to test their listening skills, which was dumb as hell because All Might taught heroics not English studies, but whatever. Katsuki wasn't surprised when Izuku had barely made it past the first page with chicken scratch and incoherent scribbles. All Might with his exoskeleton self had decided to let him stay during lunch to finish it. Katsuki isn't even sure if Izuku was aware that he was taking a test, or that the rest of the class was leaving. Regardless, Katsuki and the circus attraction had eaten their lunch outside of the classroom, waiting. He didn't expect to be called in by a frantic All Might. He didn't expect to find Izuku hyperventilating on the dirty butt floor with his hands picked away to all hell. Izuku didn't remember how he got in here. He had just remembered the hands and that they were touching and they were everywhere, in every place where the colony of ants was crawling under his skin, pressing and searing his skin. Young Midoriya, are you all right? He had been taking a test, he thinks, and everyone had already finished but he'd needed extra time, so All Might, oh my god, All Might, had proposed he stay during lunch to finish the test. He had stayed during lunch, though he didn't know how much time had passed. It was just the blinding lights, and the deafening silence, and the rough fibers of his uniform. He was supposed to be taking a test. It was just a test, it was just a test. But the hands were reaching and touching and rubbing and grabbing and reaching and touching and rubbing, and All Might was in front of his face now, mouth moving, sunken in the face, brows furrowed, hand reaching. His mother reaching up to hit him, his mother swinging the bottle, his mother reaching for his pants when he was 8, his mother reaching with her hands. And then there were different hands reaching, double the hands reaching, trying to touch and grab and reach. Zuku. Izuku let out a broken sob, his head ducking into his chest and his teeth were clamped stubbornly on his bottom lip. He wasn't sure when the picking at his skin had started, but there was blood smeared all over his fingers covering the freckles that Kat had said were cool. Sometimes Katsuki would trace them with the edge of his fingernail and Izuku. And he wished he was here right now cause Kat would always make everything better whenever things got this bad because he would always hold him, but not too tight because he knew he didn't like that, but he would hold him and use his rough fingers to wipe away the tears that he didn't know were there away. Look at me. Now Izuku didn't know who was talking because everything was black and his vision was quiet, and he wished that his ears were quiet too so he could go to sleep, but he couldn't because someone was touching his face and it made him want to scream and cry. Izuku, look at me. But the fingers touching his face were rough and calloused and smelled faintly of smoke and gunpowder and the battlefield. A strangled sound left Izuku's throat and then his hands flew up to grip at the wrists of the person touching his face. Cat. His eyes flew open and thumbs swiped themselves under his eyes, and he didn't care that he was probably covered in his own snot and tears in front of the hottest boy alive because Katsuki was here. Hey! Izuku sobbed again, wet and loud, ringing in the room. He was gripping Katsuki's wrists like a lifeline. You're okay, it's okay. No, it wasn't because his breaths were stuttering and stuck in his throat in a big glob and there was fat clumps of tears blurring his vision and oh, look at that, his hands were bleeding. Another pathetic sound ripped through his throat, vaguely resembling garbled Japanese. I know it's okay. You just have to breathe for me. Hands weakly clawed at Katsuki's wrists, tugging and pulling because it was searing and too much but somehow not enough because he wanted them to stay but his skin was burning and when Kat moved his hands away he let out a frustrated sob and tried to tug them back. I'm not going anywhere. And the hands were back but with a rough and grainy material that wiped at his face, and it made him flinch back because it was rough and grainy and a not good material, but a hand somewhere held him in place. He didn't know where, he couldn't tell. His body was on fire, his lungs were filled with cotton. "I've got you, breath." He took in a staggering breath, sweet air filling his lungs before its exhale was choppy and hiccuped, overtaken by a wet sob rolling out of his throat, and he still couldn't breathe. I know. It's okay. Try again. 15 maybe 20 minutes, he didn't know, passed by in a blur, and he didn't know what direction was up or which way he was supposed to look or anything other than everything hurt and everything was too much and he was being dunked in a tub of ants. And by the time Izuku came back to it, the classroom was dark and empty, save for Kat, who was crouched down under the desk with him. Burden, he's such a burden, with one hand curling around the back of his neck and the other pressed against the curve of his jaw. His mouth was still moving and telling him things he couldn't hear cause his vision was fuzzy and his clothes were still itchy and his hands were sticky and the floor was dirty. And "That's good, take another breath for me, Izuku." A whimper came out of his mouth and he felt hot tears trace their way down his face. The thumb from before came up and wiped them away again. He breathed. "Hey." Izuku closed his eyes and pressed his face into the warm hand against his jawline. He gave a shuddering sigh. A soft laugh rang through the room. "Tired?" Izuku blinked sluggishly and shaky hands came up to sign before Katsuki shook his head. "It's okay, that was one hell of an episode." His voice was rough and scratchy, soothing in all the ways it shouldn't be. "Let's get you back to the rich boy dorms so you can sleep." So Izuku allowed himself to be tugged out from under the desks, allowed himself to be lifted and guided into a chair. Fingers were snapping in front of his face. "Demon, you're really out of it, huh?" "Am I?" "Izuku." There were hands on his cheeks now and they were warm and familiar, so he couldn't help but lean into them. "I'm gonna need you to get on my back when I say so, 'kay? Izuku, I'm gonna pick your lazy butt up now." He vaguely feels himself moving through the thick fog settled over his head. When his chest made contact with something warm and solid, he pressed his cheek into the surface too. "Hold on tight, stupid nerd." Uncoordinated limbs were being looped around something when he made no move to follow through with the commands. The same warm hands from before were splayed under his thighs. Izuku reads a lot in his free time, reads books in both Japanese and English, and is working toward learning Korean too. But the feeling his body had when his feet left the ground was indescribable. He was pressed close to the heat he had been chasing from the small touches on his face and neck, his ear picking up the faintest sounds of a heartbeat and vibrations from where it was pushed up against the said surface. His face was tucked into the junction of somewhere, a neck, maybe, no not maybe, definitely, and Midoriya Izuku felt ethereal, intangible, abstract, unreal, weightless. The walk to the dorms was just like when they used to walk home together, except Izuku was asleep on his back, soft puffs of air hitting his neck. Katsuki was talking to himself, for his own comfort he thinks. The FAN idiot shouldn't have gone to school to start with, he should have listened to Katsuki's reasoning and Reptile Girl's blunt statements of, "You're useless in the state that you're in anyways." Seriously, what kind of FING comfort mechanism? But instead, he had some sort of mental breakdown on the dirty classroom floor for half an hour and had practically ripped apart his hands in the process. Katsuki thought at first that it might have been his sensitive butt getting overwhelmed with the lights or something, but he found out later from All Might that the hero had seen him struggling and tried to put a hand on his shoulder to reassure him that it was alright. Yup, if anything would fucking do Izuku in, it would be an adult hand coming out of nowhere. Funny, it wasn't, how the most determined person Katsuki knew could crumble with just the simplest touch. So now Katsuki was standing in the elevator with a passed-out Izuku on his back waiting for the doors to open to Fumicage's floor where Izuku and Katsuki were supposed to meet the rest of their friends. They had decided on Fumicage's dorm since it was the darkest and probably the most peaceful too. Katsuki himself liked it holed up in the emo but room. It was blanketed in the thick scent of incense and candles. The door was open just a crack already, so Katsuki busted the FNG door the rest of the way open with his foot. It slammed against the wall, startling Tsu and Fumicage who were already settled on the bed. "Katsuki, is that not unwise?" considering that Izuku is asleep on your back? Shut up, Bird Beach, he needs to get up anyway. The dumbass barely ate anything today. But was that entirely necessary? Fumikage squawked, exasperated. Whatever, Izuku was up at the very least, and he was patting Katsuki's arm gently to let him know he was ready to get down. The rest of the night was fucking fine. They had managed to shove some crackers and hot chocolate down his throat, and Katsuki had even managed to coax him into letting him dress the picked-apart skin on his hands because this was Midoriya Izuku they were talking about, and there was absolutely no way he would have done it himself. The same Midoriya Izuku who spent hours surfing Wikipedia trying to find errors just so he could correct them himself. The same Midoriya Izuku who forgot to tie his shoes and ended up tripping over his own feet twice a day. The same Midoriya Izuku who always had his pretty face stuck behind a clunky book. The same Midoriya Izuku who chewed the tip of his pencils and never wrote in pens because pens were permanent recognition of your mistakes and stupidity. The same Midoriya Izuku who would get delirious and lethargic from hugs that lasted longer than 3 seconds because he never got kind touches at home. The same Midoriya Izuku whose head was in his lap and was letting him trace the freckles on his cheeks, completely oblivious to his burning red face and Fumicage's pointed stare. The same Midoriya Izuku who fell asleep to the soft touches of Katsuki's calloused fingertips on his pretty face. Midoriya Izuku had a problem. It wasn't like he tried to stay up for 48 consecutive hours in a row, it just happened sometimes. If he didn't pull an all-nighter, or several, he usually snagged somewhere from 2 to 3 hours of sleep a day, which in his opinion, was enough for him to function perfectly fine throughout the day. Thank you very much. While he wouldn't call himself an insomniac, he preferred to say he had a busy brain. Katsuki and nearly everyone else around him disagreed. Izuku's nights were usually filled with long documentaries, sometimes about pigeons, sometimes about imperialism, and legal documents of recently released court cases or laws passed. He couldn't help it. There was just so much to learn in such a short amount of time. Izuku was sitting in Katsuki's bed, oh my god, Katsuki's bed, back against the wall and his laptop balanced on his pretzel legs. Kat was asleep on his side already, his back pressing a comforting and constant heat against Izuku's thigh. Katsuki always slept on his side, curled forward just the slightest with his hands gripping the sheets. It was cute, everything about him was cute, considering he acted like a feral dog whenever he was conscious enough to process the most minimalist string of thought. Kat was quiet and deferential when he was this way. Deferentia as in malleable, perhaps pliant or docile. No, something less big-wordy sounding. When Katsuki was asleep he was delicate and soft. Yeah, that's it. He would argue that Katsuki was always delicate and soft, but he knew it was a case out of his favor, since Kat tended to be delicate and soft in his own special, violent ways. Like how he'd almost, Fumikage had held him back, luckily, punched Kirishima in the throat after he'd found him covered in a red substance that looked suspiciously like blood, only to find out that it was red hair dye. Or like how he'd kicked Ochako in the shin, terribly hard by the way, it had bruised horribly and Izuku had given her some cream and ice for it, after she had snuck out with Ida to go feed a stray cat without telling anybody. Or like how he would flick his fingers gently between Izuku's eyebrows when he forgot to sleep again. A familiar sensation that he'd probably feel tomorrow. Izuku's eyes skirted down to the bottom right-hand corner of his laptop. 3:58 a.m. Alright, so it was a familiar sensation that he'd probably feel today, but nevertheless, it was Katsuki's way of saying, I care about you. Izuku scribbled in his notebook, glancing up at the screen every once in a while to ensure he hadn't misspelled anything. He was working through a lengthy article by some fancy American university about the regeneration of lizards' limbs, hoping to find a connection to Shuji's limb regeneration. Not that he was on talking terms with Shuji, but he was curious about how it worked and what the limits were to his regeneration. Only problem there was that he'd have to have an in-depth discussion with him in order to find out anything regarding Shuji's quirk. He'd barely spoken a word to the guy all year. The only time they'd spoken was back in the forest with Kat had been swiped right under their noses. He had bumped into Shuji in search of one of his best friends and had found Fumikage raging out of control. Then, Izuku told Shuji to go on while he tamed Dark Shadow. Izuku had ended up summoning one of his familiars, not his foxes. No, they were always his first choice and he couldn't risk them getting hurt. So he had, regretfully, summoned his white umbrella cockatoo, a pretty bird, yet unbelievably stubborn, that he used during exercises when he needed eyes from above. Together, they had drawn Fumigage and Dark Shadow out from their corner of blinding chaos and agony. His bird had raced beside him as he had booked it to where a glacier could be seen from afar where he had assumed Todoroki, and Cat, he had prayed, was. After they had reduced Dark Shadow to a cowering wisp, he had held Fumigage's hand until the shaking had stopped and had pulled the sleeves of his cardigan over his palms to dab at his tears. That night Izuku's breath had stopped when he saw that not only Katsuki had been taken but so had Fumigage, because he only trusted 3 people and the bad guys had 2 of them. In the aftermath, while Tsu was pulled away for a tongue injury, which Izuku had fretted terribly over, he had pulled Fumigage into a tight hug, and when Tsu came back with her tongue sticking out awkwardly, he had pulled her into a hug too. Together they had shaken and cried for Katsuki and their own fears and emotionally torn minds like the children that they were. His pretty bird had gently cooed from her place on Izuku's shoulder instead of squawking like the brat that she was. He had run his freckled fingers over her feathers as thanks before tearing the crimson-stained sticky note. That was then and this was now, months after the fact. Katsuki was asleep right beside him with his face tucked in Izuku's thigh, having rolled over sometime in his sleep while Izuku was in deep thought. Fumigage was back in his own dorm, having some one-on-one time with Dark Shadow, and Tsu was in one of the girls' dorms since apparently it was girls' night. Izuku was glad that the girls invited her everywhere. The 4 of them fit together like puzzle pieces, but sometimes Tsuyu would have problems that none of them would be able to solve. Once she had been bedridden with terrible PRD cramps. While Izuku had scrolled frantically through Google for an answer, Katsuki had patted her head awkwardly and Fumigage had brought her a banana from the kitchen. The banana? What girl, who just so happened to be in unbearable pain, would want a banana? Sometimes, he didn't know why she hung around them. Izuku glanced back up at the document and frowned. He supposed the only way he could do some real research was by asking Shuji or detaching some limbs himself. Not Shuji's though, Shuji didn't deserve that. Of course, he wasn't going to go on cutting off people's limbs, but he also wasn't entirely comfortable talking to the other boy. Izuku settled that 1 or 2 or 20 hypotheses was the best he could do, along with some careful analysis during training and independent research. Did you CK? Izuku startled at the sudden break in the dead silence, body clenching up and his pencil falling out of his hands. The pencil was pink and had little crowns on it. It had come in a pack of Disney princess-themed pencils that Sue and bought for him as a gift when she saw him scrounging the floors for chewed-up pencils during lunch. This one just so happened to be Aurora-themed. He cherished the pencils with his life. Katsuki groggily pushed himself up, rubbing a hand over his face. The F-, he said, clearer and angrier, this time, when he saw Izuku's laptop and an open-face notebook crammed with endless words and terrible drawings of bone membrane. Izuku it is. He squinted his eyes at the blinding laptop screen. Fuckin' 5:30 in the morning. Izuku smiled sheepishly, missing the warmth of Katsuki's soft breaths puffing against his bare thigh. He was only in his boxers and a too big baby blue hoodie with a pretty blue monarch printed on the front of it. He had bought from the girls section at Handem. So you liked the store. That one time Class 1A had gone to the mall. He couldn't care less though, since it was the absolute softest thing he owned. There had also been a black version of the hoodie, which he would have preferred, but Katsuki had insisted that the blue one was better. Hagakure, who had just so happened to bond with Tsu over fashion and had followed them into the store, said that the blue made his eyes pop, whatever that meant. Sorry. Got distracted my butt. Katsuki said angrily, the F, are you even reading? He looked back and forth between Izuku's notes and the article pulled up on the laptop screen. Why dash? Kat shook his head, slapping the laptop closed and yanking it away from Izuku in one fluid movement before he even got the chance to react. Izuku threw up his hands in protest, but Katsuki caught them with his own. They were warm and calloused, rough and contrasting from Izuku's own hands. When was the last time you slept, stupid? Izuku looked away, his eyes suddenly feeling heavy. He squeezed Katsuki's hand. Katsuki squeezed back. Did you even sleep at all? When Izuku didn't answer, Kat sighed, deep and throaty as he dropped Izuku's hands in favor of dragging a hand down his face. Sorry. Sock idiot, Kat said lazily, head dropping forward onto the baby blue hoodie. It made Izuku's gut coil in the wrong ways, just like it did when Kat clasped their hands together or ran his fingers through his curls or traced his freckles or… Katsuki pushed himself off of Izuku's shoulder with a loud sigh. He raked Izuku's hair back from its place where it was tangled on his forehead. Izuku's curls were knotted together and unmanageable. Even though he tended not to wash his hair every day, Mina said it dried out curly hair horribly, he was really starting to push it when it came to his personal hygiene. Seriously, Katsuki caught his eye and his face twisted into a concerned grimace. When was the last time you slept? Izuku, when was the last time you effing blinked? Izuku smiled at that, half because he wasn't entirely sure himself, the sleeping part not the blinking part, and half because he thought that the comment was funny. Go take shower. Kat mumbled, I'll clean up your shitty research. Right? 'Cause they were supposed to meet Sue and Fumikage for breakfast soon, it was nearly 6 already. Izuku dragged himself out of the bed where all things were warm and comfortable and cringed when he stood, little back dots flitting around his vision. His legs ached and tingled from having them crisscross for so long. Thank you. I am sorry. Izuku signed sloppily before stumbling his way into the bathroom. Forgive me for being concerned, but perhaps you should cease your consumption in caffeine and… Fumikage tilted his head and squinted the eyes at the box in Izuku's grip. Pocky. He shook his head as if to clear it. Because of course the FNG bird had never heard of Pocky before. I don't believe I have seen you without a can of battery acid since daybreak. Katsuki snorted. Battery acid? The F-dash? Despite Fumicage's weird interest in gothic poetry, incense, and Tim Burton, an American movie director who was emo as F, the guy had one hell of a sense of humor. Katsuki pitied the poor souls who still thought that Fumikage was an emotionless BSRD. Monster. Izuku signed with a goofy grin that shot an arrow straight through Katsuki's heart. Everything he did shot a stupid arrow straight through Katsuki's FNG heart. Harsh, Izuku. That's the name of the energy drink you deprived emo F-dash. Seriously, how have you never had Pockies before? Did your parents FNG starve you or something dash? Katsuki said, throwing his useless but worksheet at Fumikage. The worksheet, in all its glory, sunk to the floor pathetically midway to its destination. And he's right, Zuku. Katsuki slapped the box of Pockies out of an alarmingly weak freckled grip before taking the monster for himself and holding it just out of reach. Ya had a fucking enough. Izuku frowned at that. It was cute. He was cute. He was really fucking cute. I was not cognizant that a mere breadstick dipped in fraudulent strawberry frosting was a necessity to my health and my very entity, Katsuki. No, not the strawberry ones. Sue said, with amusement lacing her voice. Only the chocolate ones. The strawberry flavor is the best flavor of POCKY. Like hell it is. Katsuki shouted back. It was nice having more than one friend, specifically friends that could talk. Now, he wasn't just talking, screaming, to himself. He had woken up roughly half an hour earlier than he usually did and had found himself face to face with Izuku's pretty freckled skin, which would be normal since they usually ended up tangled together whenever they had sleepovers. It never failed to get his heart racing and his face flushed. But after his useless brain decided to do its FING job, he soon came to realize that he had been cuddling up to Izuku's thigh. He absolutely did not self-combust, thank you very much. Which drew him to his next conclusion. Izuku was not laying down, nor was he asleep. Turns out the fucker had pulled an all-nighter because he got caught up on some FING website with size 8 font about lizards? Katsuki couldn't bring himself to care that early in the morning and upon getting a good look at Izuku's shitty state, decided to let Izuku take his time getting ready. Fucking idiot looked 10 seconds from collapsing by the time he had finally rounded a bleary Izuku into the common room. By then, they hadn't beaten the rush of breakfast and Fumikage and Tsuyu looked annoyed as hell with them, until they saw Izuku, in all of his sleep-deprived glory, put his left sneaker on his right foot. Shitty Kirishima had given Izuku an energy drink after he saw the poor bestiardi push on the pull door at the entrance of the dorms. Since then Izuku had been jittery and excited all day. It looked like he had a very not-so-subtle meth problem. Especially since their school's vending machines seemed to have a never-fucking-ending supply of Monster. Katsuki decided that he would never ever let Izuku drink caffeine again. Tsuyu's tongue shot out to snatch the Pocky box. "You should try one, Fumi." Just as Fumikage pulled out a stick, a thunderous shout ripped through the air. Izuku flinched violently and instinctively, Katsuki's hand moved for the Dantier hand. They were soft and small like always, he was soft and small. "Yo yo yo. How are my favorite students doing dash?" A subtle, unenthusiastic murmur sloshed around the room as everyone began to make their way to their individual seats. "Great." Katsuki didn't think he'd ever get used to being in present mix class, and he didn't think Izuku would either. He gave the freckled hand a small squeeze. Izuku squeezed back. He hated himself for the tug at his heartstrings. Many things had made the school day more eventful than it usually was, many things. Izuku had one hell of a crash after the FNG 3 cans of Monster wore off. Tsu had taken his wallet and convinced him he had left it at the dorms, and he was left useless with squinted, bleary eyes and a delirious mind. Katsuki didn't have the brain power or patience to recount every FNG incident, but one thing worth filing away for later was how Izuku had been so FNG drunk on sleep deprivation that he had mixed up his FNG empty box of Pocky with his nerdy notebook. Izuku had ended up throwing away his notebook inside of the box and hadn't realized it until Katsuki fished it out for him and hung it before his pretty eyes. On the plus side about a tired Izuku was that he was unbelievably cute and cuddly, and he'd even fallen asleep on Fumikage's shoulder during lunch. Katsuki denied the accusations of jealousy from Shitty Hair and Frogface. On the downside, he lacked all rational thought, common sense and dignity. So when Izuku announced that he was going back to Inko's house, Katsuki refused to believe that it was Izuku's home, and that he'd be back before curfew. All the movement in Fumikage's room came to a halt. "The F? You going back there for, shitty nerd?" Katsuki was past the point of accepting that Izuku was a DMN good son and would do anything to keep Inko healthy and safe. This time things were different though. "She is my mother." "Absolutely not," Fumikage said firmly. "You are beyond exhausted. It will only be for a few hours. You'll be more vulnerable on your way there," Tsuyu croaked. "Not to mention on your way back when it's dark outside." That was exactly what Katsuki worried about. He was well aware that Izuku could hold his own in his fight. Despite everyone pegging him for being just another useless pretty boy, he was beyond strategic and intelligent. Every single move he made was planned and carefully measured with precision, whether that be on or off the battlefield. Katsuki was aware he was afraid that Izuku would come back with blossoming bruises on his freckled skin, all because he wasn't able to fully process his surroundings. That, added with how he would be able to handle Inko by himself, was just a FING recipe for disaster. "I will be back before dark." "I'm coming with," Katsuki said, already starting to get his things together. "No. I will be okay." "No the FUW dash." Katsuki stopped himself, pinching the bridge of his nose. There was no point arguing in what was already decided with Izuku. "I just need to check on her. Make sure she is okay," Izuku assured with a soft, doped-up smile. Katsuki dragged a tired hand down his face. Fumikage forced Izuku to turn on his locations and Tsu patted his head for good luck. Katsuki hated how Izuku's head followed after Tsu's hand, searching for the touch again. He was going back to the woman who was the reason he melted at every subtle touch, who was the reason that he used to come to school with funny little cartoon-themed bandages and a closed-off aura. "Text me when you get there, and if you don't I'll effing kill you," Katsuki said, wrapping Izuku in his arms. He felt the drag of Izuku's head bob against his chest, and when they unraveled after a second or two too long, he swore the room felt just a little bit colder. Izuku gave him 2 thumbs up and a completely non-reassuring smile that just effing screamed, in a sheet, before turning around and promptly smacking his forehead on the doorframe. "Izuku is in love with you." Tsuyu said bluntly, and Katsuki's entire deck of cards fluttered to the ground when his hands suddenly went slack from surprise. You should pick up your cards, Kat. We can see them. She croaked disapprovingly as he spluttered and denied it the abnormally sudden accusation. Shut up. You don't know anything. Don't be foolish, Katsuki. Izuku is just as exceptionally terrible at suppressing it as you are. Fumikage said calmly, picking up the fallen cards and combining them with the rest of the deck. He began to reshuffle. It's nobody's fault but your own that you are unable to comprehend and recognize with that irrational brain of yours what a crush is. Who the F are you calling irrational? Katsuki started, Before he could finish, Tsuyu stared him straight in the eyes with her stupid face and cut him off. You. She deadpanned. I'll kill you both. Tsuyu frowned. No, you won't. We're the only people who bother to put up with your attitude. You little dash. Get a hold of yourself, Katsuki. Fumikage scolded, crossing his arms over his chest. Why don't you just express your sentiment to him privately? Now that Katsuki thought about that really was the question of the DMN year, huh? He didn't think that Izuku would be opposed to being together with him, considering they were basically already FING dating. At the same time though, he didn't exactly know if Izuku would reject him because he wasn't ready. Maybe there was a reason that Izuku hadn't made a move yet. Tsuyu's hand on his shoulder startled him out of his thoughts. He frowned and she mirrored the look on his face. We can help. It's painful to see you two dance around each other all the time. Besides, everybody already thinks you two are dating. No, Katsuki said, shaking his head furiously. No way in hell will you two freak shows be my wingman. Why are you so opposed to the concept? Fumikage asked, tilting his head curiously. Suddenly his eyes widened and his hands moved to brace themselves against Katsuki's shoulders. He tried to brush the hands off but Fumikage held a firm grip. Are you repulsed at the thought of being romantically NTMT with a male? I assure you there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. Karo! Tsuyu agreed, passionate and serious. Katsuki blinked. How in the world did they get stuck with me? Taken back by his friend's words, Katsuki's face blanked out. His best friends were trying to reassure him because they thought he was insecure. They were trying to tell him that it was okay to be him. They had taken all of him, flaws, temper, and all, and now they were trying to remind him that it was okay to be him. If Katsuki really had been beating himself down because of his tendency to drool over boys, with freckles and emerald curls and swirling jade eyes, then he'd probably be ugly crying tears of relief right now. Fortunately, he had come to the conclusion that was very into boys after the incident in middle school when Izuku and himself had decided to dress up as the Scooby-Doo gang for Halloween. Katsuki had dressed up as Fred, he had refused to be the doped-up bumbutt, the useless chick, or the mutt. Izuku had dressed up as Velma, his mother had even done his makeup and everything. They didn't talk about how red his face had gotten or how he had shot water out of his nose when Izuku had first walked out. He had decided he didn't like Izuku with makeup on because his stupid FNG, pretty, lovely, cute, endearing, freckles were covered up and Katsuki hated not being able to see his freckles. Though, he wasn't exactly opposed to the idea of Izuku with eyeliner on, which he put on every once in a while for special occasions and sometimes when he knew that they wouldn't be doing anything too drastic for All Might's class. He always added a little cat eye to the end too, nothing too dramatic but definitely still flattering and pleasing, alluring. Izuku was so pretty with eyeliner on Katsuki's heart couldn't take it. Kat? Tsuyu asked, poking at his cheek. Your face is really red. The freak show. Katsuki sighed and fell backwards onto the carpet, throwing an arm over his face dramatically. Demon it, he ground out through gritted teeth. Tsu patted his arm sympathetically. We must devise a strategy. Fumikage said firmly. I didn't even effing say you guys could. He was cut off. Your curse was less angry and more. Tsu put a finger to her chin thoughtfully, but more accepting. Fumikage nodded somberly along with her statement. It was starting to get strange how well the BSTRDS could read him. His phone suddenly chimed. Izuku had gotten to Inko's house safely. A whoosh of relief swept through him. Is it Izuku? Fumikage asked softly. Katsuki stared back at him. Yeah, how'd you know? Fumikage leaned back against the bed frame and crossed his arms once more. You always regard everything around you in a peculiar way when he is in attendance. It was starting to get real and strange how well the beasters could read him. Like how do? Katsuki barked back, hands unconsciously sparking. Dark Shadow came out of seemingly nowhere to pull himself over Fumikage in a protective stance, ready to pounce at any given moment. Dark Shadow. Katsuki is a friend, you know better than that. When Dark Shadow sagged at the disappointment in his voice, Fumikage placed a hand on top of the demon's head, like he was petting a dog and not a fing demon sent straight from the underworld. Thank you for being loyal to me, he reassured gently. We must continue to work at your social capabilities though. Fumikage said before Dark Shadow shrieked happily at the praise and dispersed into thin air. Where the DMN thing went, Katsuki would never fng know. All he knew was that the demon was still in the room, and that was just based on the trash can occasionally being ruffled through and the sheets on the bed being tossed around mischievously. Fumikage had once said it was like dealing with a toddler and always had to tell the fing demon off more than once for the same offense. It was definitely like a fing dog. No need to get sour, Katsuki. Fumikage said, perhaps you can start off by telling him how you feel? Now wait a demon dash. Yeah, so you agreed. Oi dash, they were talking like he wasn't even there. You should do it tonight when he gets back. She continued, ignoring him. No dash. Excellent idea, Tsit. Would you two just dash? The sooner the better. Fumikage dipped his head in approval. Shut the F up. Katsuki roared, hands crackling and smoking. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Hey man dash, a mane of red hair popped out from behind the door. Oh, what's up Tsu, Tokoyami? Katsuki didn't know why he was surprised that the other two were here because first of all, it was fing Birdbrain's room to start with, and second of all, the four of them were usually clinging to each other like fing glue. Katsuki really hated how much he had softened up for the DMN freak shows. Anyway, listen, bro dash, the door opened the rest of the way. Fing shark mouth. We can hear you back in the common room, so I was wondering if maybe you could quiet down a bit? Whatever, Katsuki scoffed, rubbing the back of his neck. It was the closest fing thing Shitty Hair was ever going to get to an apology. I'm going back to my room anyways. An exemplary idea when in the context of our procedure. Fumikage said, giving Katsuki a nod of respect. Kirishima tilted his head in confusion. What procedure? Kat is going to tell Izuku that he loves him. Tsuyu smiled warmly up at Kirishima, completely unbothered that she just told someone that Katsuki was in love with his childhood best friend. Katsuki's face was on fire. Fumikage and I made the plan ourselves, it's foolproof. She croaked smugly. Oh. Kirishima's eyes lit up with excitement like a fing puppy. Nice man, good luck. Let me know how it goes. Shut up or die. Kirishima chuckled warmly. Well, see you guys later. I hope Midoriya says yes. He waved before shutting the door with a gentle click. Katsuki shoved his textbooks into his book bag angrily. F you guys. I'm sure it'll go just fine, Katsuki. Fing pigeon. Katsuki heard Fumikage sigh heavily as Dark Shadow knocked over a stack of textbooks just before he slammed the door shut behind him. Katsuki jumped DMN near half a foot in the air when he heard his door click and creak open ominously. The rational part of his brain calmed himself the F down though when he realized it was just Izuku, who had texted him about a half hour ago that he was heading back to the school. Hey! Katsuki said as Izuku stepped into the room. He frowned when he didn't get an immediate response. Zuku! Izuku's movements were sluggish and unsure as he let his backpack slip off his shoulders and fall to the ground with a dull thud. Logically, Katsuki knew he was probably just tired. It was more than likely that he'd slept less than 3 hours within the past 2 days. Fing self-destructive idiot. Izuku. But Izuku stayed standing in the doorway with hands slowly coming up to wrap around himself like some pathetic self-hug. His curls hung in front of his eyes. Katsuki couldn't get a good look at his face. Katsuki's heart spiked and he suddenly stood up, phone sliding off his lap and falling to the ground. He didn't care. Hey dash, Izuku took a few hesitant steps forward and Katsuki lunged forward to close the space between them when a distraught sound ripped through Izuku's throat, intangible and strangled. Hey, Katsuki caught Izuku in his arms and pulled him into a bone-crushing hug. He could feel Izuku lodge his head into his neck and curl his arms tight around Katsuki's body. It wasn't one of those episodes where Izuku couldn't think straight out of crippling fear, or a panic attack clawing its way out of Izuku's throat, slick with trauma and things that Katsuki didn't want to imagine. No, he thinks Izuku is just tired. He was shaking, dainty hands bunching up the fabric of Katsuki's shirt. A shirt that was dry against his skin despite Izuku's obvious distress. He wasn't crying. Izuku wasn't crying. It scared Katsuki, so he did what he did best in situations like these, held Izuku. He laid a hand behind Izuku's head, pressing the smaller further into his body and dropped his voice down to a husky whisper, "What happened?" It was Inko, Katsuki thought, because it was always Inko. There was a small poke to his side, gentle yet shaking. Right? 'Cause Izuku couldn't sign right now, not with the grip Katsuki had on him, anyway. The fingertip barely brushed against his shirt as it slid unevenly along his body. It was an X, maybe to say that he didn't want to talk about it, or that he wanted Katsuki to let go. Either way, Katsuki wouldn't know unless Izuku was able to communicate and use his hands. The door was still open and Izuku apparently had never zipped his backpack up because all of his nerd supplies were scattered around the carpet from where his bag had slipped from his shoulders. Katsuki pulled Izuku back from his chest, and he swore he heard a small noise of protest come from the boy in front of him. Izuku stared at his feet the whole time. "Come on, stupid nerd, let's get you cleaned up." Katsuki pretended not to notice how the subtle nod he got in response resembled a rippling tremor. Thankfully, when Izuku finally did look at him, he saw nothing too effed up marring his skin, not anything close to that one time with the infection at least. There was still a scar hidden under pretty curls just below his hairline. It made Katsuki's heart ache whenever he saw it. Even after Katsuki helped Izuku out of his jacket and sneaked a glance at Izuku's bare torso, freckles, as he changed, all he spotted was a bruise and a handful of nicks. The bruise was blemishing against his jaw, disappearing under his chin while the nicks were along his fingers and palms. Katsuki had just finished slipping Izuku's fallen novels and journals back into his bag when a quiet noise suddenly caught his attention. He probably wouldn't have caught it over the rustling of Izuku's bag if he hadn't been on edge over the tension coiled tight in Izuku's lithe body. Katsuki looked over his shoulder to where Izuku was sitting on his bed with his knees drawn tight to his chest. He was completely bare save for his boxers. It wasn't weird. They were practically raised together and gym class was a thing that FING existed. Though, Izuku preferred to change at the speed of light instead of standing around to talk like a lot of the other guys. In fact, Izuku usually slept in his boxers and some type of loose-fitted top during the summer. Again, Izuku trusted Katsuki and he would never take that for granted. Katsuki had seen the way that Izuku tensed up when Mineta or some other perverted dude would catcall the girls at school. It made him sick to think about the burden of secrets Izuku must carry. The sound echoed around the room again. Izuku was snapping his fingers together trying to catch Katsuki's attention. "Wanna borrow a shirt?" he asked softly before grimacing when his voice projected grainy and rough. The edges of Izuku's mouth quirked upward. "Yes, please." Izuku rested his chin on top of his speckled knees. The freckles were never ending. Katsuki propped Izuku's bag up against the wall before ruffling through his dresser to blindly toss one of his sweaters at him. It was a black knitted turtleneck, something his mom bought for family photos one time. Katsuki is pretty sure he hasn't worn it at all since then, with an exception of the rare dress casual occasion he was forced to attend because of his parents. Izuku pulled on the turtleneck and went back to his original position, knees tucked under his chin. There were dark marks under Izuku's eyes, his eyes dull and lips chapped. "You look like sheet," Katsuki muttered, crossing the room and sitting down beside him, pressing a palm to Izuku's cheek, the one without the bruise. Izuku leaned into the touch with closed eyes. After a few moments the tension began to leave his body. Izuku melted into his hand, unraveled himself to lean into Katsuki's body instead. The occasional tremor still shot through his body. What happened? Katsuki asked again, pushing back a dewy curl dangling in front of tunneling emotionless eyes. Izuku pulled back to sign unsteadily, I do not want to talk about it. Bullshit, Zuku. You can't just come into my ifa room looking like you had a run-in with the effing devil and expect me to. He cut himself off with the desperate look that Izuku gave him. Please. No more. Katsuki wanted nothing more than to scream and maybe skin Inko alive in the process. Instead, he pulled Izuku into another tight hug, tucking the curls under his chin as he held him to his body. Izuku clung to him just as he had before, and after a couple of beats of silence, Katsuki spoke. He swallowed thickly, you don't need to leave. He tried, fingers fiddling with the curls wisping against Izuku's neck. You don't need to go back to her. Izuku tightened his hold on Katsuki, not pushing away to defend his mother or get angry like he usually would whenever the topic of Inko was brought up. Fing bullshit. The rest of the night was silent. The noise of air being pushed through the vent was grainy and rattled. The air wasn't thick with essential oils or other hippie shit like Fumicage's room. The room wasn't covered in fairy lights or the glow-in-the-dark stars that stuck to the ceiling like Tsu's room. There wasn't an endless pile of library books overdue by 7 months from the local library stacked up 3 feet high like Izuku's room. It was just Katsuki's room, a bag of hot Cheetos thrown on his nightstand carelessly, a frayed horror movie poster and a handful of cactus on top of his dresser because he didn't give a damn if the shitty lesbian called him a plantman. He effing loved his cactus more than he loved his own family. Izuku had fallen asleep after Katsuki had demanded, that they lay down. Izuku hadn't slept for God knows how long and he'd forced himself to stay up just to make sure the FNGBSRD had really gone to sleep. They had lain on their sides, facing each other but not touching. Something was still tugging at the back of Katsuki's mind at the fact that Izuku didn't cry. It wasn't like Izuku cried a lot to begin with, usually keeping his emotions at bay from the public eye, but it always unnerved Katsuki that Izuku didn't really cry after fed up things with Inko like this. Not like he used to when he was younger, anyways. Either he cried in complete silence or he sobbed like he was going to fall apart at any given moment. It scared Katsuki when Izuku cried like that, cried so hard that you could hear the hurt, but it scared him even more when the tears were silent. Tonight there were no tears. And it scared Katsuki. The shrill cry of an alarm ripped through the air, making Katsuki shoot up with a start. Izuku had also sat up, one hand gripping Katsuki's arm firmly. Izuku tossed the covers off of him and moved to slide off the bed to grab his phone from his bag, but Katsuki stopped him. Don't get up, I'll do it. Sorry. Shut the hell up and go back to sleep, you insomniac. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Izuku smile fondly. After Katsuki successfully shut off Izuku's alarm, he flopped back down into the bed. They didn't have class today. He didn't know why Izuku had set his alarm for the butt crack of dawn. Just as Katsuki was beginning to drift back to sleep, there was a poke at his side. He sighed and rolled over on his side to face Izuku. They were in the same position that Katsuki had last remembered before he had knocked out for the night, face to face on their sides. Close but not touching. A silence stretched between the two of them, comfortable and warm. Izuku was pretty. He looked better than he had the night before, even though his curls were standing up in wild directions and his eyes were half closed with exhaustion. Katsuki hated the bruise painted against his pretty skin. He was mussed up from sleep, but the eye bags digging into his face had faded the slightest and his pretty green eyes weren't unseeing and dull anymore. Instead they were warm and welcoming, locked with Katsuki's own eyes. Katsuki suddenly remembered Tsuyu and Fumicage's lame but plan. He was poked in the side once more before he had a chance to get lost in his thoughts. Katsuki's sign name. Izuku's signs were unsure and wavering again, but this time because he was still groggy from sleep. Not because the woman that was supposed to love him unconditionally had hurt him again. The little shallow cuts along his hands were already scabbed over. Katsuki was glad they had been so minor. He didn't have any band-aids in his room. I have a question. Katsuki blinked, his gut pooling with anxiety and mind running through every possible thing that could have happened if Midoriya Izuku, probably the smartest person in all of Class 1A, was asking him, Bakugou Katsuki, a question. By no means was Katsuki a dumbass. He passed every test and assignment with flying FING colors. The problem was that Katsuki wasn't intelligent. He was street smart, clever in the middle of the battle when he needed to be, but he had never had a craving for learning like Izuku did. Bakugou was the kind of smart where he studied hard and his grades reflected off of it. He was the kind of smart where kids mooched off his homework because he always got full points back on it. Now, Izuku on the other hand, was the kind of smart where you could ask him why airplanes were able to move like they could and he would break down everything down the smallest details of information, explaining the math and physics behind it and everything. He was a FING genius. Izuku looked unsure, hands faltering for a moment. Spit it out, nerd. It's just you and me. Katsuki murmured. The silence was thick in the room and he wasn't sure if he wanted to disturb the waves of quiet washing over them just yet. What are me and you? Katsuki froze. Holy sheet. He could not F this up, holy sheet. He had to pick his words carefully in case Izuku was opposed to the idea of being in a relationship and was having this whole conversation just to tell him he didn't want to date. What should he say? Katsuki secretly wished that Tsuyu or Fumikage were here so someone could FANG tell him what the hell he should say because holy sheet. Katsuki shifted and swallowed thickly. His eyes flickered up to Izuku's face before going down to stare at the wall behind him. Izuku looked nervous, biting at his bottom lip and playing with his freckled fingers. Whatever you want us to be, Katsuki said finally, turning to lay on his back to stare at the ceiling trying to forget that he had just told his best friend the cheesiest line in FNG history. Katsuki heard the sheets rustle just the slightest and when he looked down he spotted a tentative hand making its way toward his. He watched as freckled fingers pressed into his own rough and calloused hand, felt the warmth and comforting weight that Izuku's hand brought. For the third time that morning, Katsuki was poked in the side. This time when he turned his head, Izuku was staring at him already. His pretty speckled skin was tinted red and his jade eyes stayed trained on Katsuki's face. Izuku smiled giddily at him, lifting his free hand for a moment to sign before his face twisted up in a frown and he decided against it. He shifted closer to Katsuki instead, curling into his body and bringing their conjoined hands up to his lips, twisting them so Katsuki's hand got a soft butterfly kiss on the knuckles. A kiss. On his knuckles. A kiss from Izuku. On his knuckles. A kiss from the boy he'd been in love with since he was on his knuckles. Izuku kissed him on his knuckles. Izuku's stupid pretty smile widened as Katsuki's face turned beet red. Katsuki's brain short-circuited when he got another. It was FNG mind-boggling to Katsuki as to how someone as stupidly pretty as Izuku ended up with a hot-headed loudmouth a-hole like himself. The faint ticking of a fingernail traced its way along the lines of Katsuki's palms. A pretty freckled hand was cradling his own. The heat tugging at his ears and the knots twisting in his gut were absolutely positively not hang there. Thank you very much. The mindless drone of American hip-hop thrummed in Katsuki's left ear. It was Izuku's playlist, which was a FING mess just like the rest of him. His playlist jumped from Western music to K-pop all the way back to Japanese rock. It was AFING-trocious. Katsuki punched Sharkmouth when he had commented on him humming to one of the shitty pretty boy Korean songs. They were sharing Katsuki's earbuds. They were practically Izuku's though since he was always asking to use them. Katsuki didn't mind, he never did when it involved Midoriya I don't ever ask for anything Izuku. Katsuki knew people watched them interact, he knew that he was more docile instead of the FING rabid animal that he was when he was around Izuku. Once, the FING pink lesbian had said that it looked like a lion tamer at a circus. Izuku held him back from murdering her on the spot. Izuku sighed contently, the sound making a warm feeling coil in Katsuki's chest. They had been dating for close to 3 months now, and it was FING amazing. It was lunch. Fumikage was quietly flipping through Izuku's notebook of observations and Tsu was letting out the occasional croak of affirmation to whatever Mina was rattling on about. Pikachu and Scotch Tape were watching some stupid butt video and Shitty Hair had an arm slung around Todoroki's shoulder, chattering mindlessly. Katsuki didn't know when the Icy Hot had gotten so friendly with his dumb friends, but he usually never did anything but stare blankly at the table and nod when he needed to, so it was fine. Katsue himself was barely tolerant of him while Tsu and Fumikage were acquainted. Izuku tried his best to include Todoroki in their dynamic since he sat with their lunch table, but it was hard when the zoo attractions were the most socially stunted beings on the planet and Katsuki was an a-hole. Todoroki seemed to fit in better with the idiots anyways, they had enough energy and personality to share with him. Todoroki was calm and blank-slated, like someone had forced him under a mask, like he was torn away from touch and all kind things. He reminded Katsuki a lot of Izuku. It was coincidentally funny, it wasn't. There was a gentle tug at his uniform jacket. Katsuki turned his attention back to Izuku, who smiled cheekily back up at him. God, his smile was so pretty. Izuku dropped Katsuki's hand in favor of signing Cat. Katsuki grunted in response, "What is it?" "Cat." Izuku signed again, pointing to the exit of the cafeteria. When Katsuki's face twisted up in confusion, Izuku sighed and wrapped the earbuds around his phone before bringing his hands up to sign again, Cat. And again, Cat. And again, Fiti. Normally, Izuku was like an open book to him, but Katsuki was at a fing loss right now. A curl of shame and uselessness twisted in his gut. "I have no idea what the F you want," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. His hand moved to rest on Izuku's knee comfortingly when the other let out a frustrated noise, with his nose all scrunched up from the sour look on his face. It was unbelievable how lucky he got with Izuku. He was even effortlessly pretty when he was angry. Emerald curls bounced around as Izuku suddenly turned to face Fumikage. Despite his frustration, he lightly tapped him on the shoulder to get his attention. "CT." Izuku signed, flailing his hands in the general direction of the exit. "I am afraid you've encountered the wrong individual. Your boyfriend is beside you, Izuku." Izuku shook his head earnestly. Fumikage stared at him like he had grown two heads. "Yes, Izuku," he said slowly, like he was talking to a toddler, something everyone knew Izuku had limited patience for. Bird brains could be a real piece of shit when he wanted to be. "I am not sexually attracted to men. Therefore, I am not Katsuki, your significant off dash." Izuku shoved at his shoulder, and Fumikage gave a crow of laughter. "Perhaps give the full context so we can better understand," he said. "Kinder." Suddenly his signing turned into something meek and sheepish. Izuku hid his hands in his chest as he explained, "Cat. Behind the school. Feed." Realization suddenly punched Katsuki in the throat. Tsu snapped her fingers in revelation. Izuku is talking about the cat behind the school that he feeds at lunch, the one that he keeps in his dorm when it's raining. He didn't want to tell you because you would make him put it back outside, remember, Katsuki? Tsu pressed her finger to her chin thoughtfully. "Stop talking dash." Because yeah, Katsuki remembered, but he also remembered why Izuku was being so vague. It was because he also didn't want anybody else to know, because then Mr. Aizawa would find out, and Tsu faltered, taking notice in everyone's attentive eyes on her. Izuku hid his face in his hands and pushed his forehead to Katsuki's shoulder. "And he would take it away," she finished meekly, wilting against Katsuki's glare and Fumicage's disappointed sigh. "Oh." There was a beat of silence before. "Midoriya, you're hiding AF, cat? Can I see it? Is it a kitten?" Izuku let out a groan, muffled by Katsuki's shoulder. It was cute how he hid from the world by using Katsuki as a shield. It wasn't an uncommon position for the two of them when they were still just friends, but now they were boyfriends, and Katsuki allowed the soft, fuzzy feeling in his chest to take over as his expression melted into something fond. Katsuki's hand curled at the base of Izuku's neck, brain turning to mush when Izuku let out a soft noise at Katsuki's gentle touch. Because more often than not, Izuku didn't get touch. He didn't get soft touch or good touch, only bad touch. Once, when they were younger, after Izuku had been in Inko's house all summer to watch over the demon hag, as he does every summer, he had flinched away from every hand that came near him. Katsuki remembered Izuku crying hysterically when Katsuki's mother pulled him into a hug. He had overwhelmed. Years later, when Katsuki had asked about it, Izuku had described his skin feeling like it was on fire whenever somebody laid their hands on him. He had said that Inko had ignored him the whole summer while she probably went out to go dance around with some shitty men. Izuku wasn't so touch-starved now, but he still melted at the simplest head rub or side hug. It was the only way that he was needy. He would follow Katsuki's hand after it retreated from gently cradling his face or running itself through his curls. Katsuki was more than happy to comply, especially at night when he was allowed to curl himself around Izuku without any stares or girls giggling behind their hands. Izuku pushed his face deeper into Katsuki's arm when his fingers started working into the base of Izuku's neck, rubbing and tangling his fingers into the curls. The tender moment was suddenly ripped away when Mina let out a particularly loud shout, "Midoriya, you have to let me see it dash." Katsuki remembered where he was and a spark of annoyance flared in his chest. "Shut it!" Katsuki shouted, effectively cutting off the overlapping excitement. "This is exactly why he didn't want to tell you, dumbass." "Midoriya," Todoroki started, "do you have pictures of the cat?" Izuku suddenly shot up and nodded excitedly, pulling his phone out of his pocket. Todoroki was sitting on the other side of the table, on Katsuki's right side, and Izuku decided that it was entirely necessary to crawl over him. He flailed a few apologies behind him to Katsuki along the way as he made his way to half and half so they could bond of whatever. Todoroki's eyes shined with excitement, nodding feverishly as Izuku slid his phone across the table and started signing about the story behind every photo. Todoroki looked happy, the most content Katsuki had seen him for the first time in a while. Izuku was smiling wide, pretty freckles stretched over his cheeks. Big doe eyes swirling turquoise and jade as they lit up, his eyelashes long and dark. His emerald curls stuck up, wild and so beautiful, just like the rest of him. More than anything, Katsuki wanted to kiss him. He wanted to press his lips into every freckle from the one at the corner of his mouth that drove him insane to the ones dipping in between his fingers. Katsuki silently mourned at the loss of heat pressing against his left side before it was replaced by another figure. Fumikage elbowed him in the side. He had scooted over to take Izuku's place. "You are staring, Katsuki." His tone was teasing and light. Maybe in another universe where Katsuki wasn't recovering from the shock of his stupid boyfriend's face, he would have let his hands erupt in fireworks. But this wasn't another universe, because Izuku a few seats away, chatting with Todoroki with a smile so bright it seemed to light up the rest of his body along with it. Katsuki swallowed thickly, forcing himself to tear his eyes away from Izuku so he could look at the other. "Shut it, bird brain," he hissed, no bite or real heat behind the words. "I'll accept that as a thank you then," Fumikage said. Katsuki huffed, looking away from Tsu's grin and Fumikage's head dip, both thick with smugness. "BSS." Being with Izuku was easy, everything about Izuku was easy. It was easy to get lost in his swirling jade eyes, it was easy to clutch his hand and hold it tight without ever having the thought of letting go, it was easy to stare at him and ponder how someone could be so pretty. For months Katsuki had held his breath, debating on what-ifs and going back and forth as to whether Izuku actually wanted to be in a relationship with him or not. For months he had wondered what it would feel like to hold Izuku without having to remember that they were just friends. For months he had wondered what it would be like to have Izuku to himself, to have Izuku feel the same warm, explosive feelings in his chest as he did whenever he accidentally locked eyes with pretty jade-colored ones. Until the kiss. Technically it wasn't a real kiss, it was just a kiss to the knuckles because Izuku was either a coward or he was a gentleman. Katsuki likes to believe he was the latter. Regardless, a kiss was a effing kiss and Katsuki was not going to take that sheet for granted. Because it was a kiss from Midoriya Izuku, kiss. Midoriya Izuku had put his lips on his hand and holy shit had it been euphoric experience. Katsuki decided after a couple of minutes, seconds, of thinking it over, that it was the best feeling in the world. Katsuki finally had gotten what he craved after years of waiting. Now he could touch Izuku, not like that nasty BSS. Without having to find an excuse, he could hold him and treat him right. Another plus was that Bakugou Katsuki would kiss him. He could kiss the Midoriya Izuku, which was real FNG tempting, but he couldn't just spring it on him like that because Katsuki was awkward as shit, and on top of that they'd barely been dating for 3 months. The other thing that worried him was Izuku's past. He had seen how nauseous he looked when Mineta, the DM busy, groped one of the girls, or how nervous he looked when a not-so-FNG vanilla scene came up during their designated Class 1A movie nights. He didn't want to hurt Izuku. He didn't want to force him to do something that he didn't want to do because Izuku didn't know how to say no. Katsuki didn't know if he ever had the option to say no. He was well aware that Izuku's mother would bring home men every so often, but other than that one dumbass Makoto, Katsuki didn't think that he had met the others yet. So, no, Katsuki was not just going to kiss Izuku just out of FNG nowhere because there were so many things that he didn't know, so many things that Izuku hasn't told him. He didn't want to ruin whatever safe space he had built up so carefully over years of hard work and persistence. He didn't want to break the trust that Izuku had in him. There was a brush of a thumb over his knuckles, startling him back to reality. A freckled hand squeezed at his own. Katsuki looked up to catch Izuku's eyes. They were magnifying, impossible not to get lost in. Izuku tilted his head suggestively to the side just the slightest. "What are you thinking about?" Katsuki glanced down at their interlocked hands, warmth churning in his gut when he was reminded once again that they weren't holding hands as just friends anymore. Nothing. They were in the common room with the rest of Class 1A. The room was plunged in darkness, save for a couple of candles blossoming around the room. The girls had decided to invite everyone to their girls' night for the week. It was a tradition for the girls of 1A to set up one of their weird but spa days once a week, but Katsuki wasn't going to talk shit since Tsu seemed to like them. Fine. Katsuki cared for the stupid but frog. All of Class 1A was settled on a canopy of blankets and pillows, all in their respective pajamas. The girls had handed out face masks and nail polish to whoever they thought needed them most. Laughter and side conversations filled up the expected silence of the night. It was a hushed atmosphere, soft around the edges with the walls painted yellow from the candle lights and the thick scent of lavender incense flooding the area. Tsu must have suggested that Fumikage bring some of his incense to the shitty slumber fest they were having. Izuku frowned at him. His lips were bitten raw from worrying at them when he got lost in his stupid scientific train of thoughts and his incapability to use the chapstick that not only Katsuki had bought him but also Tsu, Uraraka, Yorizu, Hagakure, Momo, and even Ifeida had bought him. Something about the health of Izuku's skin. Do not lie. I'm not. Katsuki scowled, turning away from the other. It was hard not to stare. His freckles looked less prominent in the dim lighting of the room, but they were still completely and utterly effing beautiful. He wanted to count every freckle on Izuku's face. Katsuki tried once before class, but he got lost in the sheer number of them. They had been too blurred and smattered against his porcelain skin in the morning light. He blessed Aizawa for seating Izuku near the window. Izuku was gorgeous when the sunlight hit him spot on, with his pretty jade eyes shifting turquoise and thick ringlets of emerald curls glistening and shimmering in the light. The morning sun always brought out every shade of green in his hair, all the way from seafoam green down to almost pitch black. Sometimes Katsuki swore there were golden flecks in Izuku's swirling eyes, but he thinks he might just be imagining it. Izuku swatted him in the arm. "You are lying. Lar." He fingerspelled, emphasizing heavily on the part where no, Katsuki was FANG lying. Nevertheless, a smile pulled at Izuku's face, innocent and trusting. It made Katsuki want to melt. In the dark, Izuku was softer around the edges. He was not so blinding with his charming features and a soft smile. He was still pretty, but instead of his eyes leaving Katsuki breathless, they made him feel tender and mushy. Instead of his gorgeous freckles talking up every second of Katsuki's mind and thoughts, they were quiet against Izuku's skin, making him look soft and velvety. Instead of frivolous curls, blinding Katsuki with the variety of color and glistening hues, they lay dull and simple in the dark. They didn't seem as alive as they did during the day without the sun or fluorescent lights hitting his curls. Even so, they still bounced and twirled in the shadows, and every time the candle would flicker just so, It would illuminate Izuku for a split second and Katsuki's senses would be flooded with an explosion of pretty greens and turquoise blues before the colors would disappear just as fast as they came. Then, Izuku was so pretty. Katsuki swallowed thickly, looking away from his boyfriend, who was patiently waiting for an answer, before he accidentally embarrassed himself by drooling all over Izuku like some desperate loser. I'm not lying. Real FANG smooth, playboy, he mentally kicked himself. You are lying. You look upset. Izuku signed sternly, eyebrows knitted together with worry. Why are you lying to me? Dash. Kaminari called out, like some FNG 4th grader or something, Bakugou is in trouble. What? Siro looked around, confused. What happened? Bakugou is lying to our dear pretty boy Midoriya Dash, Kaminari called out dramatically. It made Katsuki want to sock him square in the jaw. His eye twitched. Katsuki had been trying to scale back on the violence ever since him and Izuku got together. Izuku had never liked it when Katsuki got in fights, and he didn't want to risk the relationship that they had because of his incapability to sit the F down and keep his DM cool. Shut the F up. He yelled instead. I'm surprised your dumbass even knew what he said. He scowled. Having a love affair, Bakugou? Mina teased. I'll kill you. Do not kill anybody tonight, please. Stop yelling. Uraraka whined. You made me mess up Shuji's nails. Shuji, being the demon alien that he was, had FNG 6 arms and the girls were determined to paint all of his nails on all of his hands. No worries, Uraraka. They look just fine to me, thank you. Shuji said kindly, reaching one of his finished hands up to blow a steady stream of air on his nails. Tell us, Baku bro, what are you hiding from your boyfriend? Kirishima cackled. I'm not effing dash. Midoriya. Come get your man. Shut. Oh. Are you going to tell him that you love him? What the F? Were you thinking about other boys? No. Bakugou, I must say I can absolutely not condone you lying to your spouse dash. What? They're not married, Ida. Simply because it can lead to many misconducts and strain in the said relationship and dash. Oh my effing dash. In Bakugou, I didn't know you were such a player dash. Shut the F dash. Kick his butt Midoriya dash. Shut the F up, I'll kill all of you. Izuku shoved at his arm in disapproval, yet he was still laughing, all bright and bubbly and pretty. The freckle at the corner of his mouth stretched along the corner of his lip with the movement, and Katsuki pretended his eyes weren't following it. Izuku was pretty with a smile on his face. Well, Izuku was pretty all the time, but when he had a smile on his face it was a gentle reminder that Izuku felt things other than hurt. For a second, everything else drowned out except for Izuku. Izuku's pretty smile and soft laughter, the candlelight flickering just so and blinding Katsuki with glamorous hues of greens and an explosion of freckles before plunging Izuku in a sheet of muted color once again. Good God, how did he manage to score someone so beautiful and kind? Katsuki didn't realize he was staring until he tapped back into reality long enough to hear Fumikage's snide comment on, "Is there a reason you're so flustered, Katsuki?" Laughter echoing in the common room. Shut up, Katsuki muttered weakly. He could feel heat thrumming behind his skin on his face. He had to force himself to tear his eyes away from Izuku's curious gaze. Katsuki had come to the conclusion that he had to ask Izuku on a date. Yeah, it was FNG pathetic that they had never gone out in the entire 3 months they had been dating, but then again, everything about Katsuki was pathetic when it involved Midoriya Izuku. It was the only way that Katsuki thinks that he would be able to comfortably ask Izuku, "Hey, wanna make out?" But even then that was creepy as shit and in no way smooth, and most importantly, nobody in their right FNG mind would enthusiastically agree, especially not Izuku. Katsuki wasn't entirely sure either if Izuku would even agree to go out on a date with him in the first place. So, even as he spilled his stupid but logic purely based on what-ifs to Fumikage, he was greeted with the same response that he had gotten from Tsuyu. "You are dating, Katsuki." Fumikage deadpanned, placing his hands on his shoulders and forcing him to pull them back. His hands came up to grip at Katsuki's jaw and pulled it upwards so his eyes weren't singling on the very interesting pillow that Dark Shadow was currently tearing apart on the floor, but instead just past Fumikage's head. He refused to look him directly in the eye out of spite for how stupidly FNG nice he was being. Katsuki hated how Fumikage fixed his previously closed-off posture and forced it to become confident, and he FNG hated how it made him feel just the slightest bit better. He is your significant other. He established again, saying it slowly as if Katsuki was a FING dumbass who's had to repeat the 3rd grade for the 5th year in the row. His hands were back on Katsuki's shoulders. You, of all people, are permitted to grant the question of if you can have the privilege to escort Izuku off of campus. In fact, I'm surprised that you two have not departed on a personal congregation together already. As for inquiring about intimacy and Izuku's rather solemn past, perhaps just a simple discussion will do. That's the FNG thing. Katsuki shouted, throwing his hands up in exasperation. Fumikage's hands slipped from his shoulders. His eyes flickered toward the door. How am I supposed to ask him to kiss me dash? The F, is he going to say? Dash? Katsuki took a step back to shittily imitate Izuku as Fumikage opened his mouth to say something, but Katsuki didn't let him get the chance to because he wasn't effing done. Yeah, sure, let me just put on some dash. His trash but voice acting split back into his usual voice. F chapstick? There was a beat of stunned silence from Fumikage, the only sound in the room being Katsuki's ragged breathing. Then suddenly, have you confided in Tsu? Fumikage asked meekly, his eyes stayed trained on the door and it. Was psing Katsuki the hell off? What was he, Kenji dumb? Of course I asked her. All is well then I suppose, she's just outside the entrance you see. The door creaked open. I don't think Izuku would take the time to put on chapstick if you asked him to kiss him because you're in love with him. He'd probably kiss you whenever you asked, Kat. Tsu said, throwing the door open the rest of the way. Her left hand was still disappeared just past the door frame. Katsuki's posture faltered because he was pretty sure that the last time he had seen Izuku was when he was helping Tsu bake with the weird but guy who downed sugar like he was a FANG alcoholic, so that means that, like right now. Izuku, do you want to kiss your boyfriend? You look very red. Tsu asked, pulling Izuku through the door frame, and lo and behold, Izuku's free hand, the one that Tsu didn't have a death grip on, was covering his face, which was beefy red, and Katsuki hated how mushy that made him feel inside. How much had he heard? There was a tense silence in the room before Katsuki decided, because he had spent way too much time and energy contemplating this bullshit. He took a deep breath. All he had to do was be FANG normal, no weird stuttering or other bullshit. Just be casual. Casual. Go on effing date with me. Katsuki needed to fix this desperately because that's not you ask someone on a date, that's how you effing threaten someone to go on a date with you. What the hell is wrong with him? Katsuki racked his brain for something to fix it with. Please. Katsuki said meekly before adding, please go on a effing date with me. He cringed at the sound of his voice. Katsuki could feel Izuku staring him down. Fumikage stood frozen in his spot, and Tsu filled up the heavy silence in the room by humming a small lullaby. He cringed as every agonizing second passed by before. There was a snort, then another, and then a giggle, and then Izuku was bent over, laughing hysterically. His face was flush pink, and there was a clumsy hand smearing away tears from his freckled cheeks. Smiles looked good on Izuku, but this was a whole nother level of beauty. Katsuki didn't think he'd seen Izuku laugh this hard since Kaminari had built a rocking chair the wrong way. Instead of going back and forth, it had gone side to side. God, Izuku was beautiful. Before Katsuki knew it, Fumikage and Tsu were joining in, Tsu with her weird little hiccups of laughter and Fumikage with his chuckles that were interrupted by the occasional bird cry. Stop laughing at me. Katsuki shouted, glaring daggers at the DMN freak show as they wiped tears from their eyes, but he couldn't help the smile tugging at his lip. Izuku gasped for air as his laughter died down, scrubbing at his eyes as he slid down to the floor. Yes. He signed, dainty hands coming up unsteadily. Yes, I will go on a date with you. He was smiling so wide it almost made Katsuki's vision blur. Izuku's eyes were dewy but bright and lit over with an emotion that he couldn't quite place. Katsuki felt drunk just looking at him. Izuku knew a lot of things. He knew the periodic table, it was memorized, the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath, and their brain structures, and he knew all about quantum physics, along with the laws governing macroscopic objects. What he didn't know was how to date kind and prideful boys that poured their all into everything they did with passion. Boys that gave their everything to Izuku without expecting anything back at all, boys that were conscious and well-informed about Izuku, ones that could read him like an open book. Boys that held Izuku's hand when he was having a pathetic meltdown at 2 in the morning, boys that wiped away his tears with calloused hands and held him like he, disgusting, stupid, worthless, Izuku, was the most precious thing in the world. More specifically, Izuku didn't know how to date Bakugou Katsuki. Katsuki deserved so much more than he was getting. He deserved the stars and the moon, he deserved to be warm in the snow, to be dry in the rain, to be happy when there was despair. Yet the only thing that Izuku had ever done was press his lips to Katsuki's hand, twice. Izuku was well aware that Katsuki wanted more, he was well aware that Katsuki deserved more. But Izuku was also aware that Katsuki would never force him to do something he wasn't ready for. He trusted Katsuki. He trusted Katsuki enough to sleep in the same bed with him, he trusted Katsuki enough to be unconscious around him, he trusted Katsuki enough to let down his walls around him, he trusted Katsuki, he trusted him. Izuku had said yes to the date because he trusted Katsuki. Even after he overheard him talking about kissing, the kind that's on the lips, which was something that Izuku really didn't want to do, but he knew that Katsuki wouldn't make him, he never made him do anything. Except maybe for eating. Or sleeping. Or drinking water. Izuku wanted this, he wanted to go on the date, he wanted to look nice for Katsuki. He wanted Katsuki to know how much he appreciated everything he's done for someone as pathetic and burdening as Izuku. Which lead Izuku to his next predicament: how do you get ready for a date? Aizu? Tsu croaked softly. Yup. Sorry to disturb you. Izuku didn't really have any other options. Besides, Tsuyu knew everything well when it came to romance anyways. And fashion. And skincare. And just about everything else besides the Copenhagen interpretation theory, a topic that Katsuki has had the unfortunate luxury of being well informed about during Izuku's 3-hour-long rants in the middle of the night. For some reason, Katsuki listened, watched, to his stupid rants about it. In fact, he always gives Izuku his undivided attention whenever he goes off on the dumb tangents. That wasn't easy either, considering half the time, when Izuku wasn't having a 7,000-word article read out loud to them by the weird computer bot, Katsuki would have to pay special attention to his hands to pick up every single word. Conversations in sign language were like that, they required undivided attention. Izuku felt his heart swell whenever he remembered all those times during Izuku's frantic explanations about completely irrelevant scientific theories when Katsuki's unwavering gaze never left his hands. Is this about your date with Kat tomorrow? Izuku felt his face redden. Yes. Tsuyu. Oh no, what's taking you so long? Uraraka asked, peeking over Tsu's shoulder. Her face brightened when she saw him hovering by the door frame. That's right, because it was girls' night in the dorms again and Tsu had mentioned hosting the event in her dorm, hence why the four of them hadn't had another miraculous sleepover in Fumikage's room. How could he be so clueless? Dumb, stupid, selfish? Oh dash. Uraraka grinned big and wide, ear to ear, just like she always did. She was a kind soul and Izuku was initially drawn to her in the entrance exams because of her smile. It was real and raw, filled with genuine love and happiness. Izuku would give anything to see his mother smile like that again. Don't pretend like she ever did. Midoriya's here, everyone. She called behind her. He really wasn't interested in being surrounded by the girls of one. It wasn't that Izuku necessarily disliked them, it was just that sometimes they could be a bit much when they were all together like this, too loud, too loud, too loud, too loud. Izuku was known and respected to be a reserved boy, a quiet boy who tamed the worst, a caring boy who always greeted everyone with a smile in the morning. Right now though, Izuku was stressed to the end of next week about the date, and he wasn't interested in the aspect of the girls in his class to witness one of his pathetic breakdowns. Usually, he would go to Katsuki's dorm just to have the comfort of having a person pressed up against him, but Katsuki wasn't an option right now. He cringed when he heard shouts and hollers of his name filled with nothing but warmth and invitation. Yet here Izuku was being a selfish burden again, unable to coherently form a thought just from a little noise and some stress. He didn't realize he was shriveling in his spot with hunched shoulders and clenched hands until Tsu took his hand in hers with a squeeze and led him into the room. Izuku has a date with Katsuki on Friday after classes. Tsuyu announced to the group of girls. He stayed close to her back. Geez, Izuku thought, straight to the point. Oh, that's wonderful. Yaoyorozu, beautiful and elegant, kind and compassionate, yet still marked with a streak of dry humor and reckless behavior. Izuku was partnered with her once for a class project. She was strategic and incredibly intelligent. Needless to say, the two of them put together had scored them top markings. A squeal came from just to the right of Izuku. He jumped about a foot in the air before he realized it was just Hagakure. It seemed she had opted to wear just the bare minimal clothing to the little sleepover frenzy the girls were having. In fact, all of the girls were in skimpy clothing. Now that Izuku thought about it, it was rather indecent of him to be in a room filled with girls in their loungewear, whether he was dating a boy or not. We have to get you ready immediately, Hagakure cried. Now. Yes now, silly. Today's Wednesday, tomorrow's Thursday and dash, she gasped devastated, as though someone had died before sobering up almost immediately. It seems the other girls in the room had also calculated something that Izuku was somehow unable to by the murmurs and distressed whispers flying around the room. Girls were hard to read, they just knew too much. Tonight you do a face mask, she decided, all serious and steely. And tomorrow we all take you shopping. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed, all of them? I have clothes in my dash. Mina waved away his signs just as he was about to conclude the obvious. Why did he need to buy clothes when he had clothes in his closet? Please, Mina placed her hands on his shoulders. Midoriya, honey, you are so pretty but dash, she stopped to try to gather the right words. We know you don't have anything in your dorm other than flannels, vests, and those ratty but hoodies you've probably had since you were, like, 9. Jiro finished for her. You dress like it's fall every day of the week. Hagakure acknowledged. Midoriya, you kind of dress like you would own, like, for dogs. Uraraka popped up out of nowhere, bubbly and smiling wide like always. Izuku smiled back. Like those crazy ladies who own 50 cats but instead you own 50 golden retrievers. Izuku's smile dropped and twisted into something confused. You dress like a divorced librarian who works a night shift at a coffee shop just to barely scrape by to pay his child support, Mina said darkly, her gaze hardening. Are you okay? Don't get the wrong idea, it's very endearing. Yaoyorozu frantically reassured, just a tad too casual for a date. Izuku nodded after a beat of thought. Tsu always knew best and she trusted every one of these girls dearly, so maybe they all knew best too. He gave a kind smile to Yaoyorozu, just to assure her that no harm was done. She really was too kind. Great. Hagakure took Izuku's hand. It was weird to have his hand held by something that seemed to not exist. Now, come over here, Midoriya. Yaoyorozu bought one of her fancy rich people face masks. Katsuki hadn't really prepared at all for the date, and it was so shitty of him. Friday had gone relatively normal, with an exception of just about FING everything. It had started FING pouring on their walk from the dorms to the main building. Tsu had hummed the usual stupidly FING happy tune she did whenever it rained while she skipped in puddles and splashed all around, making a FING mess. The rest of them had taken the rain like a bunch of miserable wet cats. Fumikage only tolerated rain when it sprinkled out. He got all philosophical and sheet and stared at the clouds and got all angsty Edgar Allan Poe on their buttes. The rain was unpredicted, and somehow there was not a singular FING umbrella between the four of them. So, they did what normal FING people did, they booked it. Of course, until Izuku, emerald curls plastered to his forehead, rain clumping his long dark eyelashes together, pretty freckles standing in eye-catching contrast to his milky skin. This boy was going to kill him, had pointed out that they had left Tsu behind frolicking and prancing around in the rain like it was a FNG field of flowers. His boyfriend had insisted on going back to get her because she can get sick. And her uniform will get very wet, which didn't make sense because the rest of them could get sick and the rest of their uniforms were just as wet, but alas, Midoriya Izuku was his one and only weak point in the reputation he had built for himself. So they went back, Katsuki beaching and miming, until Izuku slapped his arm and Fumikage trotting beside Izuku with his jacket held over his head for some sort of protection. It took DMN near 20 minutes of coaxing from Izuku to get Tsuyu to come inside with them, which is how they ended up inexcusably late for class, soaked to the FING bone, and a detention slip clenched tight in each of their hands. It was worth it, Tsu croaked dreamily, staring longingly out the window in Recovery Girl's office. Like hell it was, you shitty tadpole. Katsuki ground out from clenched teeth. Did you see the rain though? She clapped her hands together excitedly and pointed to the rain outside of the window like they hadn't just effing bathed themselves in it. How could it effing miss it? Izuku suddenly stepped out from the bathroom inside the nurse's office looking considerably drier with the new uniform that Recovery Girl had provided him with. His wet uniform was in a bag. His hair was still wet though. Instead of clumped pretty ringlets he had long drawn-out S-shaped waves that stuck to his skin, and Katsuki couldn't help but stare. Izuku raked his hair back from his forehead, apparently irritated with the feeling, and while Katsuki's FANG heartstrings just pulled themselves impossibly tight. I am done. You can go now, Kat. Izuku moved to stand beside Fumikage, who had been the first to change. He hated the feeling of his feathers being weighed down with water and was soberly stewing in the corner of the office. Katsuki's eyes followed him the whole way because Izuku, pick your jaw off the floor, boy, we don't have all day now. Recovery Girl hip-bumped him, as she walked past him, tut-tutang along the way. DMN hag. From there, the day had gotten impossibly worse. The four of them ended up serving lunch detention cleaning present mixed classroom, and during that time Dark Shadow had managed to FING obliterate 4 desks in the 5 minutes that Katsuki had taken to take out the trash. When he got back, Izuku was scrambling around the classroom like a madman, frantically trying to gather all the salvageable papers that had been thrown all over the classroom. Tsuyu was calmly cleaning the desks that weren't torn to shreds or smoking like they were going to burst into flames any second, and Fumikage was yelling at Dark Shadow about his unlawful conducts. Then Present Mike stepped through the door, and as if on cue, one of the smoking desks burst into flames. How exactly a FING desk burst into flames was all beyond Katsuki. All that he had known at the time was that they were in deep shit, which turned out to be a FING waste of time worrying, since Present Mike left them off with a warning when Izuku frantically apologized, looking like he was about to burst into FING tears. The only conclusion that Katsuki could draw to that was the fact that if Nedzu was informed, then they'd all have home called and Inko at a parent-teacher conference? The fact that Izuku looked ready to have a mental breakdown at the thought of Inko knowing about the destruction of an entire FING classroom just made Katsuki even more upset than he was originally. Sure, any kid would be freaking out at their parents having to cover property damage bills, but this was something entirely different. Whether it be from the stress of something else entirely piling up or that Izuku had finally reached a breaking point with Inko, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Inko had caused the reaction. It had Katsuki's blood FING boil. On top of that, Katsuki had forgotten about his date with Izuku. In fact, he hadn't even decided on where they were going to go or what he was going to wear. Seriously, what the actual F? He had all FING week to decide where they were going to go, and he had done nothing but worry away at his fingernails like some beach butt. Which is why as soon as the bell had rung, signaling that classes had ended for the day, Katsuki had launched himself out of his seat, leaving Izuku in the dust with his pretty stupid face, and sprinted the whole way to Heights Alliance. Of course, getting there early wouldn't solve his shitty planning, but it did give him a little bit of extra time to spare so he could FaceTime his mother. Yes, you heard the F, right, his mother. And that's how Katsuki ended up where he is now, clothes strewn everywhere in his room, his mother's voice echoing in the room as she helped him pick out clothes. Before that though, she hadn't hesitated to tell him she would beat his butt if he was anything less than a gentleman to Izuku. The demon hag had flipped her sheet when he told her that Izuku and himself had been dating for roughly 3 months. At first, she had been excited and called for his dad, then angry that he didn't tell her earlier, then happy again when his happy-go-lucky dad came in and started crying like the oversensitive but grown man that he was. Katsuki, you can't hold off things like this, son. His father rubbed the back of his neck through the Katsuki's phone. It was propped up against a bag of flamin' hot Cheetos. Katsuki, you know better than to wear those rags on a date. His mother suddenly shouted, looking horrified at his choice of clothing. I'm trying dash. Don't curse in school. Daemon hag, Katsuki went to retort back when, listen. His father's voice suddenly rose to prevent Katsuki from opening his mouth any further. Always the DMN peacemaker. Let's keep the bickering to a minimum tonight, please, for my sake and the rest of you.A's. Now, son, when and where are you taking Izuku tonight? We can pick out clothes from there. About an hour and a half from now. Excellent, we have some time to get you ready then. His father smiled kindly, probably to ease the breakneck FNG tension that was heavy with the stress of being late. Now where are you taking Izuku tonight? Katsuki winced and sat down on the edge of his bed rubbing his neck, ashamed. Don't know. You don't know. His father said blankly, you don't know where you're taking your boyfriend out for the first date that's in an hour and a half. I know. I know it's so shitty, but I don't know where to effing take him. Katsuki burst out, throwing himself back on his feet with his arms thrown exasperatedly in the air. That's why I've called you guys? His mother's expression softened for a fraction of a second before it went all steely again. Listen, brat, we don't have any time to spare. Izuku likes cats, right? She plowed on without waiting for an answer. Masaru. Yes, dear. Check the weather. His father ducked out of view. Right, so anyways, Izuku likes cats. There's a cat cafe that opened up recently downtown. The only problem is it closes at 7 p.m. You can try to make the time slot, but chances are you'd be rushing poor Izuku. The other solution is taking him to that shitty courtyard that he used to love to run off to. The one with all the stray cats and whatnot. It's not very romantic, but it has sentiment to it still. It's going to rain again. His father suddenly popped up from out of the corner of the screen. No worries, Katsuki. His dad reassured frantically. The panic must have shown on his face. You can take him out to the gazebo by that pond with all those fish. Cats usually hang around there anyways. Katsuki blinked. Maybe tonight wasn't going to be an FING shitshow after all. Sentimental and romantic. His mother nodded approvingly before her face twisted back up into something not good. But food. His father said, your mother's right, you can't just take someone on a date and not feed them. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. Now that just won't do, will it? Katsuki dragged his hands down his face and groaned. They didn't have time for this. He had to be ready in. Katsuki checked the time. I'll figure it out. I have to be out of here in half an hour. I'll just... what do I wear? He hadn't even rebrushed his teeth or did his hair or washed his face or... Frozen yogurt. His father suddenly exclaimed with a big grin on his face. You can take him out for frozen yogurt and eat it while you're at the gazebo. That's my husband. His mother laughed proudly and slapped him on the back in praise. His dad staggered at the physical affection, but gave a grin regardless. You know, just like how every woman laughs barbarically and slaps the Japanese out of their husband instead of kissing their cheek or hugging them. Holy F. His mother was the man of the relationship. Now, his mother set her jaw once again. What to wear? All right there, Midoriya? Jiro stood in front of where Izuku was perched on the edge of Tsuyu's bed with her hands on her hips. You look like you're about to pass out. She pursed her lips with worry. He must have been betraying his crippling anxiety all over his face. Izuku nodded stiffly and gave a wobbly smile. Thank you all for helping me. You have done more than enough. Oh, it's no problem at all, Midoriya. Yorizaru smiled and waved him off fondly. Besides, it's not every day we get to play dress up with one of you boys. Various murmurs of agreement spread throughout the room. Yeah. Uraraka pumped her fist in the air. It was fun. You look very pretty, Zuku. Tsuyu croaked approvingly. Thank you. Izuku took her hand in his. half to show the genuine in his words and a half for his own comfort. He supposed he did look pretty. Mina had styled his curls into something less wild and unruly, Jair had done his eyeliner, and Yorozuru had picked out a nice button-up that was a deep navy blue. The shirt sometimes looked like it shimmered when the light hit it just right. It must have been more expensive than Izuku's house and Yudata tuition combined, but she insisted. Other than that, the nice shirt was tucked into a pair of his own black jeans. They were fitted and he had to fight tooth and nail to wear them because he refused to have Yorozuru buy him another absurdly priced piece of clothing. He and Uraraka had nearly fainted when they had walked into a store that smelt like it cost $25 just to breathe. His shoes weren't bought from some insanely rich people's store either, but they also weren't his usual red sneakers. They were regular old leather boots he usually reserved for occasions when sneakers weren't exactly dress attire. They were something his father had left for him. Yorozuru wasn't happy at all when he refused to take any more of her money. "It's almost time, are you excited?" Mina jumped up and down, clapping her hands together. She really was a sweet girl, so bubbly and happy all the time. Pink suited her. Yes. Izuku signed even though his insides were tied into knots. Tsuyu tugged him up by their clasped hands and led him to the door. She twisted around to place her hands on his shoulders. "You are very pretty. Katsuki is going to think so too because he is in love with you. Stop worrying so much, you could die from that." She patted his arm kindly before pushing him out of her room. "Have fun. Bye." And then he was being shoved out into the hallway and the door was in his face. Izuku sighed and held himself a pathetic self-hug as he made his way to Katsuki's room. The hallways were lit up with the glow of fluorescent lights. The only thing present was the wake of Izuku's shadow. It was unnerving and all of the pent-up anxiety was starting to surface all over again from earlier in the week. He hadn't realized someone was walking toward him until a shout startled him out the weird funk he had pulled himself into. "Wow, Midoriya!" Kirishima came out of nowhere, smiling big as always. Izuku jumped, startled. "What's the special occasion?" Izuku felt his cheeks warm. Kirishima wasn't the best at sign language. It was easier sometimes to just spell things out for him. He was trying and that was all that mattered. "Awesome, have fun, man." And then Izuku was alone again. His feet carried him the rest of the way to Katsuki's door, his mind somewhere else. His knuckles and barely brushed the door once before it swung open, revealing a very flustered-looking Katsuki. He was also very nice-looking. He was wearing the black turtleneck Izuku had only seen lying around in his dresser. A couple of times, Izuku had snagged it for himself. It looked good on Katsuki, like really good. Izuku could tell that Katsuki's mother had helped dress him. He looked neat and tidy compared to his usual sloppy style. Katsuki suddenly disappeared behind the door again and Izuku's stomach dropped because does he think I look bad? Did he change his mind? Does he not want to go anymore? Does he? And then the door swung back open, a ball of gray material hurled itself at Izuku's face. He just barely caught it an inch or two from his face before he carefully unfurled it. He felt his heartstrings tug when he realized what it was. "It's going to rain, are you trying to get sick?" Katsuki growled, face red. "Thank you." The corners of Izuku's mouth tugged upward as he pulled the gray hoodie on. It was just a tad too big and droopy on him. The sleeves fell just past the knuckles of his hand, but he didn't bother rolling them up. He liked the feeling of security that the hoodie brought him, kind of like how he would swaddle himself in his friend's blankets at night. When he brought his attention back to his boyfriend, he was looking at him with an emotion that Izuku couldn't quite place. His face twisted up in confusion when he noticed that Katsuki himself wasn't wearing a jacket. "You could get sick." Izuku pointed at him, relaying Katsuki's information right back to him. "Like hell I will." Izuku frowned at that. He supposes that Katsuki did tend to run a little warmer than others because of his quirk's nature. "Umbrella." Izuku decided, umbrella. He signed again, crossing his arms firmly and standing his ground. "I'm not effing dumb, I've got an umbrella right here." Katsuki held the umbrella up so Izuku could see for himself. It was clutched in his right hand. Izuku blinked in surprise. He didn't know when Katsuki had grabbed it. He supposes it could have been when he went to go grab the hoodie. "Let's go." Katsuki held out his free hand for Izuku to grab after he closed the door behind him with a quiet click. Izuku's heart swelled at the gesture. Times like these he was reminded of how lucky he was to have met someone as compassionate and caring and Katsuki was. Izuku ducked down to tuck the bottom half of his face into the hoodie to hide his giddy smile that kept growing by the second. He doesn't know what he was so worried about. He trusted Katsuki because Katsuki cared about him. Katsuki would never in a million years hurt him. Izuku took his hand, letting the calloused grip envelop his own hand with warmth. Katsuki was going to have a FING slide. Well, maybe not literally, but figuratively because Izuku was some sort of FING ethereal being. Katsuki didn't even know how someone could manage to look so pretty in a shitty hoodie that's falling apart at the seams, but whatever Izuku was doing, it was FING working. It had started raining about 5 minutes into their walk back from the frozen yogurt shop when they were on their way to the gazebo already. At first, it was a light sprinkle, one that made Izuku smile and tilt his face up. One that made Izuku laugh, and when Katsuki asked what was so funny, Izuku told him that the rain was warm and it ticked, and for a fraction of a second there Katsuki liked the rain just as much. Until it started FNG pouring. For the second time that day. And rain always ruining good things. Izuku had kicked at the puddles and held his hand out from under the umbrella the whole way to the gazebo, even when Katsuki had kindly scolded him not to. And so Katsuki ended up sitting in the gazebo, where it was dry and humid from the rain that was FNG plummeting itself into the earth, and Izuku ended up leaning over the railing of the gazebo, throwing out bits of a stale loaf of bread to the koi fish swirling in the pond below. Once Izuku had figured out that they were going to the gazebo, he had lit up like a FING puppy, and even as Katsuki FNG insisted on buying them a loaf of bread himself from the gas station, Izuku had picked a half-eaten one up from a FING dumpster outside of a bakery and deemed it good enough. And so that's why Katsuki was going to have a slide looking at Izuku, because he was leaning too far over the railing of the gazebo with a raggedy gray sweatshirt that was drooping down his shoulders and feeding some fish with a loaf of bread he had found in a dumpster. The hood was up and kept slipping down too far over his face for Izuku's liking, so he kept pushing it back with freckled hands that were almost completely swallowed by the sleeves of the sweatshirt. It was such a stupid FNG thing, but it made Katsuki's face heat up and his heart do a little flip-flop just looking at the scene. Unfortunately, there were none of the usual stray cats scrounging around for food and affection. They were probably sheltering from the rain, unlike his stupid effing boyfriend who was soaked right down to the bone with cold but rainwater. "Come feed the fish," Izuku signed, whirling around to face Katsuki suddenly. His eyes were filled with joy, and the smile he was sporting made Katsuki's heart bloom with warmth. "I'm comin'," Katsuki grumbled with a hot face. Izuku clapped his hands together excitedly and ushered Katsuki to get there faster with a flail of his outstretched hands. Katsuki frowned when he saw that Izuku's nice button-up, don't even get Katsuki started on the FING button-up, was pretty much soaked and plastered to his skin. "You're going to get FANG sick, stupid. I gave you this dash." Katsuki emphasized the word by aggressively zipping the sweatshirt up to Izuku's chin. "So you wouldn't come down with a shitty cold. If you're going to wear it, at least wear it if you're right, you stupid nerd." Izuku smiled sheepishly. "Sorry," he signed quickly, which made Katsuki think that maybe he wasn't all that FNG sorry, before moving the stale but bread into his hands. "Feed the fish." Okay, I'll feed your demon fish." From where they were standing, the rain was coming down on them hard. All of Izuku's hoodie was soaked for the most part in his pretty emerald curls. They had looked especially nice when Katsuki had first seen them, were plastered to his forehead. Even his eyeliner, oh my god, his eyeliner, was running down his face in a way that shouldn't have been attractive at all. "We're going to be effing soaked by the time we get back to those shitty rich boy dorms," Katsuki pointed out. Izuku bobbed his head with a giddy look in his eyes and his stupidly gorgeous smile, teeth chattering as a shiver racked through his body. "Yeah dash," Katsuki tapped his fingers underneath Izuku's chin, silently asking for him to look up. Izuku complied. "No dash." Katsuki took Izuku's sleeve and scrubbed it over where the eyeliner was runny. "We are going the F back to the stupid dorms dash." Izuku patiently waited with no complaints as Katsuki rubbed the soggy but sweatshirt over Izuku's face to clean it up, even though it was definitely not comfortable. Because I don't want your stupid selfless butt to get sick. Katsuki leaned back to inspect his work. Most of it had come off, but in some places, he had only succeeded in smearing around the eyeliner even more. All in all, he deemed it if ain't good enough. Izuku frowned at the idea but didn't protest. Now? Yes, now, Katsuki said, even though he was leading him back to the benches inside the gazebo by his hands, where they didn't have to worry about the stupid FNG rain pelting down on them. Katsuki sat first, tugging down Izuku to sit next to him. I don't want you getting FNG sick. Katsuki frowned, slinging an arm around Izuku's shoulders when he let out a content sigh, burying himself into Katsuki's warmth. Another shiver ran through Izuku's body and Katsuki tightened his hold around him. See? You're fucking shivering. You're going to get sick. I like it here. Izuku signed sloppily, with you. Katsuki's heart skipped a beat at that. Katsuki was suddenly reminded of the conversation between himself and Fumikage earlier in the week. Did he want to kiss Izuku? Yes, he did. In fact, he was almost effing desperate, so goddamn pathetic, to have some sort of contact with Izuku that pushed their usual barriers of comfort within each other. The kiss on the inside of Katsuki's wrist had been a godsend. But since then Katsuki had been too much of a beach to return the favor and Izuku hadn't ever supplied the wordless courage again. Katsuki wasn't though either. He wouldn't ever force Izuku to do something shitty that he didn't FNG want to. Katsuki doesn't think that Izuku was even ready or prepared mentally to take that leap in their relationship. Sometimes though, it almost felt like they weren't dating at all. It felt like Katsuki was stuck back in the friend zone when Izuku would cuddle up to him and hold his hand and lay his head on Katsuki's shoulder without a care in the world, with no sense of personal space or physical boundaries. Back then Katsuki could do absolutely nothing when it came to Izuku because he was only his friend back then and it was his job to do everything that friends did. But, right now, Izuku was proving to Katsuki that he thought about Katsuki just like Katsuki thought about him, and Katsuki was content with it. Izuku had always been soft and pliant with him, but right now, it felt like so much more. Izuku mushing up his face against Katsuki's stomach with eyeliner smeared all over his face, unyieldingly letting Katsuki see him be a hot mess. Izuku's wet curls plastered to his face with an ugly hoodie swamping his slim frame, unyieldingly letting Katsuki see him be a hot FNG mess. This was more than trust. This was something stronger, a word that Katsuki couldn't quite place or bring himself to say even though he was hit with an all-too-sudden punch of realization that left him breathless because holy shit. Suddenly Izuku was pushing himself up, pushing the hood of the sloppy gray hoodie out of his face once again from where it was drooping down over his eyes. What is wrong? He signed, worriedly chewing at his lip. Suddenly Katsuki was hyper-aware of how close Izuku's body was to his. He was aware of every single freckle dancing on Izuku's face, aware of the chill in Izuku's skin, aware of the breath that smelt like strawberry frozen yogurt fanning over his face, aware of Izuku's curls starting to dry with little wisps of curls stubbornly framing his pretty face, aware of the swirling turquoise eyes and long dark eyelashes and black makeup smudged across his face and, "Are you okay?" Katsuki swallowed thickly. Yes, he said, his voice tight and strangled. He could feel the warmth at the tips of his ears but refused to acknowledge it because he was definitely not about to melt like some demon sap because of a singular, insanely effing pretty boy. Izuku frowned, unsatisfied with the answer but didn't push any further. Instead, he curled back into Katsuki, this time slanting himself sideways and clinging to him like a FING koala, his head tucked under Katsuki's chin. Katsuki let his hands rest on Izuku's back. The sound of the rain beating against the roof of the gazebo lulled Katsuki into some kind of trance that was all Izuku and exactly 0% reality. They'd have to head back soon. Katsuki had only bargained with his homeless but teacher for so much time after all, but right now he was basking in the moment with someone who put up with his endless bickering, his shitty personality, his irrational but decisions, someone who clung to him like he was the most important person in the world, like he meant something. So Katsuki squished his cheek on top of Izuku's head, ignoring the way the shitty gray hoodie was soggy with water and scratched itself against his cheek, and cradled Izuku closer to his chest. For a moment, Time was still and it was just Katsuki and Izuku leeching warmth and comfort from each other. It was calm and peaceful. Eventually, though, Katsuki's phone cut through the heavy cloud of isolation hanging above them, filled thick with content sighs and Izuku's humming, and they were brought back to reality. Katsuki had purposely set an alarm 30 minutes before the curfew Aizawa had set for them, just in case his dumbass lost track of time, which he did, so they'd be able to make curfew in time. Katsuki was not planning on serving another shitty lunch detention. Katsuki nudged at Izuku's head with his own. Izuku groaned pitifully from where his face was pressed against Katsuki's collar. "Come on, Zuku." Katsuki started to manhandle Izuku into an upright position. "I was comfortable." "Yeah, well, you can be comfortable all you want back in the FING dorms. In fact, you should have already been back inside." Katsuki tugged Izuku up by the hand and fiddled with the umbrella until it flourished. "Don't beach when you get sick later. I told you we should have gone back earlier, but no dash. You wanted to sit." Izuku signed smugly with a teasing glint in his eyes. "Shut the hell up." Katsuki snapped weakly, face probably red beyond FANG belief. He reached over to tuck Izuku into his side, one hand holding the umbrella and the other interlacing his hands with Izuku. His hands were dainty and smattered with freckles, so pretty compared to Katsuki's own, which were rough and calloused from the nature of his quirk. When Katsuki squeezed his hand, Izuku squeezed back. They made their way back to the dorms at a steady pace, Izuku kicking at the water puddled in the street and flapping his free hand excitedly at toads whenever he spotted them, gasping and pointing at them with his eyes lit up so FNG bright it made Katsuki's heart clench. Once or twice, Katsuki gathered enough FING courage to twist Izuku's hand up to his lips and press a soft kiss to the freckles there. Every time without fail, Izuku blushed like FNG crazy and pressed his free hand against his cheek. It was really cute, like some sort of FING bashful maiden or something, and, yeah, Katsuki was going to do a hell of a lot more of those. Their little leisurely stroll though soon came to end when, sheet. Izuku jumped at Katsuki's outburst and immediately started flailing around his free hand as he gnawed away at his bottom lip like it was a FING chew toy in anxiety. "Our hobo butt teacher is going to effing kill us." Katsuki shoved his phone back in his pocket, practically dragging poor Izuku behind him as he started restlessly speedwalking. Izuku tugged at Katsuki's hand to get his attention. When Katsuki finally turned around, Izuku looked back at him with confusion written all over his pretty doe eyes. "What happened? Explain." "I bargained with Aizawa's beach, but for some extra time past regular curfew and we've got about 5 minutes, till our sorry buttes get murdered." Izuku's eyes widened in panic for a split second. Despite their teacher literally looking like he lived under a motherfucking bridge, he was scary as shit when he wanted to be, and Katsuki wasn't exactly sure that Izuku could handle any more direct confrontations from teachers for the day. Suddenly, Izuku's face split into a sly smile and he was so pretty, and Katsuki should not be feeling this impacted by some stupid facial expression on some dumb pretty boy. "Race you?" "What?" And then Izuku suddenly took off sprinting, puddles splashing behind him, and a ridiculous grin on his face. "Like hell I'm letting you win on my watch, you sly motherfucker." Sometimes, Katsuki forgot that Izuku and he had been attached to the FING hip when they were younger. He forgot how FNG alive Izuku could be when it was just the two of them together. Yore was a good place for Izuku, he made friends, and people didn't stick their noses in where it didn't FNG belong when it came to his shitty home life, beach butt inko. It was just that Izuku built walls between himself and others, to prevent himself from being pitted or mocked. Tsuyu and Fumikage had the privilege of seeing through the walls. They had the privilege of seeing Izuku melt with his head on their laps, of seeing Izuku argue about stupid shit like Pocky flavors, of seeing Izuku cry about stupid shit like accidentally stepping on a ladybug, that time he had been particularly sleep-deprived, of seeing Izuku cry about not-so-stupid shit with a new welt on his cheek and hand-shaped bruises on his arms. I was beginning to worry the two of you got lost. Stupid but hobo. Izuku smiled kindly at Aizawa and thanked him for extending their curfew. Their DMN teacher had been waiting at the entrance gate to make sure they hadn't been FING murdered or anything. They had the privilege of seeing through the walls, but Katsuki had the privilege of breaking down those walls. He had the privilege of seeing Izuku be free, like some caged dove flying free for the first time in weeks. He had the privilege of seeing Izuku like this. They stumbled together along the pathway to Heights Alliance, legs feeling like jelly, hands laced together, Izuku stopping once or twice to laugh freely up to the pouring sky without a care in the world. The rain plastered his hair to his skin and turned his skin too pale as he basked in the freezing cold water. His freckles were more prominent like this, contrasting like cinnamon on a white countertop, or like the stars in the sky, or like cream in coffee. Izuku turned to look at him, eyes twinkling. This Katsuki had the privilege of seeing this. All smeared eyeliner and ugly hoodies, all breathless laughs and heaving chests, all wicked grins and sharp jabs. Holy shit, did you guys take a walk in the FING ocean or something? Kaminari stared at the two of them in disbelief as they stumbled into the common room. A movie was playing softly in the background. 1A Friday movie nights were tradition. It's raining smart, but still, you didn't care to take an umbrella? We did. Katsuki glared at Izuku. Some might say he just wanted an excuse to look at him again. This idiot was just being a pain in the butt. I like rain. Izuku signed in defense. Me too, Karo. Tsuya's eyes lit up at the thought of it. Whatever. Katsuki dragged a hand down his face. You're going to get sick, come on. Night bro and browski. Kirishima called out to them and an uncoordinated onslaught of similar, garbled responses followed. Izuku looked over his shoulder to wave at the rest of Class 1A as Katsuki dragged him to the elevator. My room or yours? Katsuki asked, even though he already knew the answer. Yours. Izuku pressed himself against Katsuki's side, sighing at whatever warmth he leached off of him. Izuku shivered again as they made their way down the hallway. You're getting the shower first, Katsuki said softly, just barely above a whisper like he was afraid to break the echoing silence running through the currently abandoned hallways of Heights Alliance. Why? You're going to get sick, Katsuki said for what felt like the 200th time that night. Izuku scrubbed at his eye tiredly as Katsuki fiddled with the key to his dorm. As soon as the door swung open, Katsuki whisked Izuku into the bathroom attached to his dorm. Izuku usually kept spare clothes in Katsuki's room anyways since they were practically roommates already. Once Izuku was in the shower, he placed them on the floor beside the door. Katsuki disposed of the discarded pile of sopping wet clothes in the corner in his laundry basket to wash for later. As soon as Izuku was out of the shower, he made a beeline for Katsuki's bed, bypassing him like he was FANG invisible, and twisted himself into a nest of blankets. The F-dash? Are you some kind of cat or something? Yes. Hurry, please. By the time Katsuki had stepped out of the bathroom, Izuku's eyes were already fluttering close, fighting to stay awake. Katsuki got the privilege to experience this. Katsuki got the privilege to have Izuku stay up just to wait for him to come to bed. Katsuki got the privilege to fiddle with the wisps of curls at the nape of Izuku's neck. He got the privilege to be clung to by Izuku like he was the most important thing in the world. The blankets were thick and cushioning, twisted around their bodies, and sheltering them from the outside world. The soft glow from the forgotten bathroom light illuminated the room, and even though Katsuki knew he should probably shut it off, he couldn't bring himself to care. Izuku mushed himself against Katsuki's body. His thick curls tickled his skin in a way that made Katsuki feel warm and sappy as sheet. Dazed with sleep, pliant from a hot shower, Katsuki sleepily pressed his lips against Izuku's forehead. He didn't process when Izuku melted under the touch, nor when fumbling, uncoordinated hands came up to cup his face, to tug it down just so Izuku could brush his lips against Katsuki's jaw. Katsuki processed that. He definitely processed that. And he couldn't help but melt under the touch himself.